Maybe that's why I like this opportunity, because this is French vanilla.
Yeah, that's nice. So I have my own private stash of French vanilla back there, but it's very limited, so I'm not sharing it today.
Since I don't have a bluebell stash anymore.
Hey.
Well, that's good. According to my doctors, that's a good thing.
Yeah, but is bluebell back functioning again? Yeah, but there's some of us that are loyal.
I'll be back on board now.
Yeah. What's a little of that disease, you know?
I don't know, it looks like something out of it.
The time now is 3:37 p.m. and we are back from closed session. The board took no action in closed session. Trustees, we're going to go ahead and move item 28B up to discuss the potential possible action to negotiate and enter into a lease agreement with Dallas NCX Properties LLC for office space in the building located at 9400 North Central Expressway. So, Mr. Terry, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President, board members. Get all the participants here. This is, we're going to talk to you about the consolidation of park departments for effectiveness. If you will notice that human capital management is in 5 different locations, and actually if you talk about the individual portables, they're in approximately 5 more. So, and notice the red location. So, you know, they have people all the way over here at the Bell building, which we also know as the Buckner building. And so when they, you know, either part of management has to go to one place or the other, or they all have to come in. So you got windshield time, and of course that cost us money. So in the HCM building, the portable buildings across the street, it's 103. In the Buckner building, 26. In the bottom building, 19. Fleet maintenance, 13. And Phantom, 8. Instructional technology, likewise, in 4 different locations. They've got 86 in the Cotton building. They've got 45 in the Ross building here. They've got 13 in the Bell building, and in Phantom they got 5. So again, notice the red locations here, and they have to travel, especially when they want to get together for whatever meetings. Well, I did that in a flash, so we will go back maybe. There we go. So here is the 76 HCM employees across the street. This used to be a grocery store. Here are 27, and you can see some of the portable buildings. They're in 5 of these portable buildings. There's 27 in these portable buildings here. This is out at the bottom, 19, and 13 out at the fleet maintenance building. And here are 26 in the Buckner building for HCM, and IT has got 13 located there. There are 5 HCM employees in the Phantom building and 5 IT employees in the Phantom building. And do remember that this building is going to be turned into the personal choice, one of the personal choice schools. Here are 45 IT employees in the Ross building. There are 86 IT employees in the Cotton building. This is...
Wait, why do you show this side?
That's a particularly flattering picture.
Because that's probably its best side.
Exactly, this is the best side, so we wanted you all to see the best
it
side
is
of the
that
building.
It's like a prison.
Oh, it's worse than that.
This is inside the Cotton building.
Oh my goodness.
When did that happen?
March 23rd.
That's really, it's a good mixture with IT.
Yeah.
Picture's worth 1,000 words.
This is what we are trying to recommend to the board is up to 100,000 square feet to consolidate IT and HCM. I do want to note that we are in negotiation, and we did get them to say that if in fact we end up in a positive negotiation, that they will sign it at no additional cost. Dallas ISD. This would be noticeable for everybody that goes up and down the Central Expressway. This would be the new image. Of course, we think that the big benefit here is we're consolidating two departments that have a public eye, and especially HCM, where all of our new teachers are coming and all our new employees will be coming. It's convenient. There's access to parking. As you know, we had looked at the Pacific building downstairs, down in the central city. We also had looked at another building, and the big drawback to those buildings was lack of parking. And here there tends to be quite adequate parking for our needs and for visitors. We think it's a professional environment that will help additional efficiencies, and that there would no longer be windshield time for the departments to get together and to interact with each other, carry on business. We also are looking at the sale of other properties which would help offset the cost. By moving these two departments, we would be able to move all the people out of the portables across the street and out of the HCM. We could then put them on the market. We also would then be able to move procurement and MWB, who's also in portable buildings, and that would then free up those three properties that we could put on the market for sale. So the operational savings for the Berkeley building, the HCM building, on a yearly basis, and this is without any inflation, so yearly we would save almost $129,000. We think that the tax-based gain, which essentially we calculated based on the sale price of these buildings, actually would be quite considerably more, because we think that anybody that buys these locations are in fact going to put a more substantial use buildings onto these properties. And then we estimate the sale price at $2.5 million for an estimated total value of $2.7 million. Here are the portable buildings. The operational savings would be almost $21,000 a year. The tax gains, $30,000, again, very conservative. The estimated sale price would be $2.3 million for an estimated total value of $2.4 million. Purchasing, procurement, MWBA building, operational savings, almost $18,000 a year. Tax gain, $10,000. Estimated sale price, just under $800,000 for an estimated total value of $811,000. So the first year, if in fact we put all of these up for sale, we think within a year we should be able to dispose of these properties. The annual savings in operations would be just under $240,000 a year, and the value for selling these properties would be altogether $5 million, almost just under $6 million. This is the North Central Parkway. We are in negotiation. The first 2 years would be $1.85 million per year for the first 2 years, plus utilities. We are asking for and looking at a lease for 2 years, and then two-year additions to that if necessary. So that would be 2 year plus, and then another 2 year. So our two-year options for a total of 6 years. Questions?
Trustee Foreman.
Once again, we are faced with no notice to make a decision.
Actually, I think I sent out a
Let me
email.
finish, please.
Okay, sorry.
Which troubles me overall. So I have a few questions.
Sure.
The first question is, how does the lease of these buildings fit into the facilities task force overall assessment? study?
Well, I think the overall assessment of the task force is looking certainly at administrative buildings, but certainly leasing is not part of that decision.
That doesn't really answer my question.
Okay, well, I'll try again.
Let me try again. Maybe I can get
I'll try
this
again
time.
too.
When we decided not to buy the Exxon building,
Yes.
I think the instruction, somebody please correct me, was to go back and look at a comprehensive plan about our building. Am I right about that? So, how does this fit into the comprehensive plan?
Well, before the Future Facilities Task Force, they are looking at a permanent solution for the administrative problem where, we have over 26 buildings that we are currently in. And we've asked them, to look at a permanent solution. And that's why in this lease, we're looking at essentially 2 years at a time. So we hope that the Future Facilities Task Force will come up with a permanent solution. So that's why we're doing these 2 years at a time, because we certainly hope that within that 6-year window, we would be able to have a permanent solution for all of those 36 locations that our administrators are in.
You also mentioned the fact that procurement and MWBE were in portables.
The MWBE department's in a portable behind the procurement building, and the procurement building, as you know, is across the street. And what would happen is that IT has 45 people in the central office. We would then move the procurement and MWBE into this location, and that would then free up procurement and MWBE for sale.
Okay, and you mentioned that there were 19 people in the Bonham location?
Correct, I believe so.
Are those the technology people are the only ones in that location?
HCM is there too.
Is,
We have some.
HCM has got some people.
so HCM is the only one, the 19 people are HCM or?
No,
IT
both.
and HCM.
So if there are 19 people, are those the only people occupying that facility?
Student activities.
Student activity.
Student activities are.
Okay, and how many people do they have?
I'm sorry. And academic facilitators.
Okay, so we don't know how many people are actually there? The
We're-
reason I asked that question is that my next question was going to be how many vacant facilities or schools that have closed that we still have, where we have an opportunity to move staff. Have we looked at that?
Well, we certainly have, but as you know that we are in process of looking at reestablishing 4 of those facilities. As I say, we're moving the people out of Phantom so that we can open the new public choice.
So we don't know. My
Well,
last
I
question.
currently can certainly send you all of the schools that are out there. We essentially had consolidated 11 schools about 4 years ago.
And my last question is this the only location that we've looked at to lease, or do we have
No.
a comparative?
Yes, we have comparative. We've looked at 3 or 4 others. This seems to be the best location and one of the better prices that we have looked at.
I would like to see the comparative.
Sure, we can provide that.
Okay. Trustees, any other discussion? Trustee Mitchell?
Yeah. Just as a matter of due diligence, a question will come up. Can all these people be relocated to the Bonham building in a way that makes economic sense?
Probably not. The Bonham building, when it's outfitted for offices, could probably handle about 80 to 100 folks, and we're talking about moving 400.
Right now, there are 80 people in the bottom building. Student activities are 5, academic instructional support 55, student services 1, and human capital management 19.
Okay, but without going through all the real estate that the district owns, I think one question that is going to be relevant to me and to a lot of people is whether we can locate this group of employees to any of the real estate that we currently own in a way that makes sense. And if I know we have had consultants who have advised us in this regard before, but I think it would be helpful to bring back some of that analysis to help make the case or not make the case as to why we need to relocate to a property owned by a third party.
Yeah, certainly we could all fit into the Cotton Building, which we have looked at. It's $330,000, but would take a considerable amount of money to renovate.
Okay, just if you could give us the comparison information that all of you looked at, so that
On the plus side, the Cotton Building comes with fountains.
Water features.
you could put a sprinkler right out there in the park.
Trustee Jones?
Were you done?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we've got, one of the challenges on the administrative assets, and this has come up and we've certainly know this to be a fact, is we also have a lot of excess capacity in the way in which our space is utilized around because of the way people are sprinkled in the distribution. And part of the strategy was to do a consolidation or to do a much more efficient grouping of resources so that they can be managed and then your cost structures go with that. So I know that's part of the analysis, and I'm very, very much in touch with that. Remind me again, what's the cross street or where 9400
Park.
Oh, so that's at Park, okay, which is a really great developing area. So the idea would be we make this transition, it happens when? This summer? Or it happens before the next school year?
Yes, before the next school year.
And what's the timetable on a transition?
Well, we have a phased-in approach on it, so depending on when we execute the lease, we have several spaces that are move-in ready now. And then the next step would, probably more than likely IT would move first and then HCM would follow. The lower floors require more renovation, carpet, painting, and that sort of stuff. But the IT floor is ready to move in.
And I will say that the part of the negotiation is that they are going to provide us $15 a square foot, or approximately 1.5 million to make ready for us.
So that was my other question. So thank you for going there. 1.85 is just base cost, but we have a retrofitting cost then?
Well, they're giving us 1.5 million for a retrofit. The base is the 1.85 plus utilities for the first 2 years.
But there's no other cost in terms of getting it move-in ready or getting it up to standard or making sure that it is outfitted?
As one has said, the 14th floor is totally would be ours, IT's and would handle, and then some of the other floors would need additional carpet and...
And is that at our expense or the landlord?
It's in their
We've got
loans.
1.5 million that they're giving us to do the retrofit, so if we go over that, it would be our cost, but anything under that, we...
And furniture, things like that, is that ours or are they providing?
They have some furniture, but we do have that allowance also to cover that. And then we have existing furniture.
Right.
Just trying to get a lay of the land. With respect to, so it's up to 100,000 square feet. You're saying 400 people would be the ultimate consolidation?
At least 400 people.
Out of, what was the total, was our original target for consolidating purposes?
Well, we actually would like to eventually move 2,000 people into one location.
But the 400 is out of the 2,000 or is the
Yes.
2,000 in addition? Okay, so we're still looking at the 1,600 that are, okay. On the valuations that they're given on sale price, who provided those? Or
CBRC.
CBRE.
I'm sorry, CBRE. Got my acronyms confused.
Right, so that's market-based analysis?
Yes.
Okay. And then, I know this comes up, it's not a critical item, but it is to the folks for whom we've named buildings. What happens when we remove ourselves from a building that has been formally named? What do we do about that?
Well, I would
we have a policy
imagine
on
unless
that.
we can talk the new owners into accepting those names, that
Well, when you take 4 or 5 buildings and consolidate it to one, do you put all 5 or? Oh.
it's okay with me.
If we have a policy, I think that's something that certainly we
But
wouldn't.
It's come up before.
It is something we do need to respect, if nothing else. Okay, so we sell these properties that you've identified here. Where does that money go? I mean, if we get those proceeds, how
Those
do we handle that?
proceeds, well, they would fall to the bottom line, to the, towards the budget. So, as an example, if we went in and sold it, the total, the $240,000 that we would save, plus we would receive on taxes, would help cover that $19 million deficit, which we're looking at next
So
year.
you're going to basically take capital proceeds and now put it into operations or put it into programmatic?
Well, no, those are the operating costs. Remember, it's the operating cost of all those buildings plus the revenue we think that we would receive once we sold it into private hands.
But the operational savings are future costs, they're not existing. So when you talk about a savings, you're talking about an offset, not necessarily.
If we close down, say, the HCM building right now, we would essentially put it up and, within a month, there would be no more security, no more heating.
Right,
no
you don't have
water,
the
no more
cost,
heating,
right, it's cost avoidance. But in this case, when I look at a sale price, I get cash, or I get actual dollars in hand. So what I'm trying to figure out is what happens to those dollars in hand? Where do they go?
Well, the way that the budget works is that we budgeted, $1.4 million. And so we have budgeted for that amount of dollars that we will be receiving from local, state, and federal. And when that budget doesn't reach that, that means those actual dollars, cash, would fall into the bottom line.
No, I'm sorry. The sale of the building, we're gonna get a big lump of money
Yeah.
all at once. That
Oh.
goes right
That's
into
what I'm,
the general
that's what I'm asking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
it goes into the fund now.
Yes.
And are any of these, so it goes to the fund balance and then it's a question of how the board decides it should be used. So just want to make that
Thank
clear.
you.
The other issue, are any of these buildings still under any sort of mortgage from previous bond programs, like where there was dollars spent from the bond program in the recent period, whether 2002 or 2008, and we haven't defeased those?
The ones that we are suggesting that be put on the market,
Yep.
no. The one that would have some would be the Phantom building up the street, which we're turning into a school.
But you're saying that the Berkeley building, the Cotton building, the HCM portables, none of these had any improvements, capital improvements?
Well, some of them have, but remember, we're only looking at the portables across the street, the HCM across the street, the procurement and MWBE across the street, and the portables, and none of those have any kind of bond money into them.
Okay, good. Let's see. And then what is our intent with the Cotton building in the future? I mean, is that another one that
I think they're in the process of repairing the roof.
Right, but what is our intent with that building in general? Do we intend to just say?
Well,
I mean, we're not selling it. That we don't have any intent to sell it. I think probably where we need to look forward at is to
Sorry.
we're looking.
investing in it, putting money in it. You see what they've done with Southside and some of those buildings along there, and that building has that same kind of structure. So
And we're researching the possibility of city money that might be available to help renovate that building.
So why wouldn't we, I mean, I'm hearing two contradictory things. On the one hand, I'm hearing the building, is long gone from being able to do much with it and it's a problem. On the other hand, I'm hearing it could be a good candidate for redevelopment, retrofit, or revitalization. So I'm
But that's something in the future. We don't have the funds now, and we're not budgeted now to do that. So it would be a phased-in approach.
so the lease idea is a way to bridge that. essentially.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to get at, and that's really
Yes.
part of the what you're bought here as an option.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Tristina.
You said how much per year are we gonna lease it for?
Well, the first 2 years, it's 1.85 million plus utilities.
First 2 years,
Yes, first 2
and then
years.
after that is how much?
After that, it goes up, I think, to 1.9, I don't have my book.
1.9 plus
1.9
Plus
per month?
utilities.
And how long are you trying
No,
to sign?
that's for the year.
Per year.
per year.
Per year.
1.9 per year. And how much are you trying, how many years are you trying to sign the lease for?
Well, what we're working on the lease is the total would be 6 years, but the way it would work would be the first 2 years, and then we have an option on another 2 years at the increased price, and then in 4 years, we would have an option for another 2 years, so.
And then after the 6 years and the lease is up, I guess the bigger question here is what is our end game? What are we trying to be when we grow up? You say only 400 people. Can
Well,
you fit it? Wait, can I?
Oh, sure.
Oh, Jesus.
Apologize.
Olivia, I lost my train of thought.
400
400 people in the building. We're trying to put 400. You say you need to fit 1,800, correct? Total
2,000.
2,000.
So is this building going to fit 2,000 people?
Well, it certainly, it could in the future. I mean, it has that capacity. It's about a 350,000 square foot building.
Is this building, will it fit 2,000 people?
Yes,
ma'am.
absolutely.
So is your end game here trying to get our 2,000 people consolidated?
Well, we're going to listen to the Future Facility Task Force and see, you know, what they're going to recommend and what they're going to come up. Certainly that would be a possibility, but, you know, owning our own building, now what we have done, and we've come before you before, you know, buying a building, you know, is certainly a possibility. Even constructing a new building is a possibility, but, you know, certainly buying a building is at this point in the market is less expensive than building a new building. Leasing right now is, as I say, the end game is to get us all into one consolidated structure. How we do that is yet to be determined.
And I guess the bigger question, because I'm looking, you talked about a TRE, you talked about a bond. We are having the agenda to borrow from next year's budget. We are increasing 47 million to our increase, asking for additional 47 million.
Correct.
We're taking 155 from special funds into general funds. We don't know the dollar amount. I requested that. I thought I might get it at 4 o'clock, but the dollar amount for that. And then now we have the future task force, and you're telling me that we're going to wait. So we want to spend 1.85 million for 2 years. It go up to 1.9 million for the next year, next couple years. We're going to wait for the future task force committee, and they can possibly tell us that we can build a new building on the property that we currently own. And in the end game, when we grow up, we have a building for sustainability. It just makes more sense that we need to come up with a long-range plan. To me, we keep coming with stuff, but yet we have 26 portables at Skyline, portables at Barbara Jordan, and I don't hear any clear plan for our students. I don't see a clear, comprehensive vision. I see us just doing a whole lot of busy work, but I don't see the vision. And this board's supposed to set the vision for the district, so when we're long gone, we can say, you know what, the kids are well, the people are well. And I'm just really kind of frustrated because we get to the table and we're constantly talking about adult issues. We're not talking about solving problems for children. This is another adult issues. We spent January, February, March, April, May talking about buying a building for adults. But no one's yet to come with a plan for how we're going to put all the children in one building. Yeah, we came up with a plan for some of the kids, but we've yet to come up. We appointed a future task force committee to do that long-range plan for me. I wish we would let them do their work, because 1.85 million for 2 years, then 1.9 million plus the retrofitting, we could have bought a building by then, built one. This to me, I mean, but you want to come with TRE and you want to go with the bond. So what do we want to do when we grow up, DISD? And as a board, I think we need to come with a comprehensive vision for this district that is going to cover everything. We keep trying to buy a building for adults that I get the building looks bad. But I also get that Skyline and the kids are in portables and unsafe. I also get that. So where do we prioritize and we make it work for all our children? So this is adult issues to me again, in the financial sense of 1.85 million for 2 years and 1.9 million. By the time we pay, release it, I think we could have, is that about, how much is that, math? You the accountant. I can't answer.
Well, actually,
2, 4, 6, 8.
$6 million would pay for 3 years of leasing.
But 12 million can we get a new, Lakewood is getting a new building, half a new 43 square foot, Elizabeth, and it's 12 million. Is it 43?
They know better. What was the square footage?
What's the square footage?
I don't recall right
But
now.
it's 12 million.
48,000.
Yeah.
And so by the time we finish,
We
it's
couldn't
12 million.
fit
How much can we
2,000
build?
people in a
How much can we
building
build?
that size.
One building there, one building here, and then put the overpass and come. How much would
I
that
think
cost?
the analysis for the previous briefings we've given you was well over $100 million.
Did we get it for a new building?
Yes,
For a brand new
built
building?
to suit.
Did
That
I
was
miss
in one
built
of
to
the.
suit? It was
yeah.
100 million? So but this is only for, you say it can fit the 2,000 employees.
The entire building could fit 2,000 employees.
This
All we're
building.
asking for are floors.
So 2 floors for just 400
It's
employees.
2, 3, roughly 4 floors.
4 floors for 400 employees. But we want to eventually fit 2,000 employees, correct?
We're
we're
waiting
not
for the
the
Future
solutions,
Facilities
right.
Task Force to provide us a recommendation. of
And so
that.
you're
That's
gonna
part
put
of their
for
work.
1.85 million for 400 people. And then 1,800, maybe 1,800 more people need to go somewhere. So they may tell us we need another
Well, we know we need-
1.85 million
need
per year
another-
for that.
yeah. We know we
So-
need a permanent solution, and as I said before, that's part of their tasking to come up with recommendations on the best way to go forward in terms of putting employees in a centralized location. This is like similar to a bridge program for administration, similar to what we did for the schools.
But, so you're saying they may come back and tell us that we need to pay at least another building for these employees, the other 1,800 employees? or
Well, we
1,600.
know that's what they're gonna come back and tell us if we have the vision of consolidating at a central location.
So potentially for 2,000 employees, it can be 1.8 for the other people and 1.8, because they can tell us we have to go get a whole
The
lot. Are
concept
we
is
gonna,
consolidate all 2,000 in the end, so the 400 that are going into the leased space will
Will
join
lease
the other
whatever.
1,600 in a consolidated space. We don't know what that consolidated space looks like right now. It could be, if the board was to approve, a brand new building, or if the board approved to renovate a building.
so this is a
or
temporary
if-
fix?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're gonna pay 1.85 million for 6 years for a temporary
Yes,
fix.
ma'am.
Well, we could wait for the future task force, and the voters may say, you know what, we've been playing with this, let's give them 100 million to build them a building. The voters could possibly say that through a bond, right? We could do that, right?
I think
So
it
this
would
is a
be very-
temporary
I
fix
think it would
that
be-
we could spend 1.85 million over 2 years, and we probably can get a whole lot done for some schools too, right? 1.85 million can do a whole lot for some schools. You get that new air condition. This is a temporary fix for adults.
adults that support kids.
A temporary fix for adults, still. Kids come first, that's why we're here. I mean, we got a building.
Yeah, we are.
No, she said it, she smarted me off. No, don't
Okay.
give it if you can't take it.
All right, thank you.
Tell my kids.
Trustee Bingham, did you have something on the first one?
I think Joyce was first, but had you already spoken?
Yes, I've
Oh,
already
okay.
spoken, and I just have one quick question. But
Okay, no, go ahead.
I guess the quick question I have is, have we ever considered outsourcing technology?
I know when I was here 4 years ago that there was talk about looking at a lot of outsourcing different departments. The one that we really looked at hard and in fact an RFP for was the custodial work, and we came and actually as part of the reduction, saved about $10 million
You did the
a year
custodian?
for the custodians,
Yeah, I remember
but the
that.
custodians stayed.
And we have looked at outsourcing certain components of technology, like the service desk, the break fix. Matter of fact, we do outsource a lot right now.
You do?
We do. Yeah, we have the SchoolNet help desk is outsourced.
And how many employees do we have? I'd like a breakdown on the outsourced amount and then a breakdown on how many employees we actually have.
Sure, and-
Direct in technology.
And I will say that for the work we look very closely at and of course this is a couple years old now, but we just couldn't get the level of support that for the price that we're paying right now. For example, we have 60 techs, and any company out there that said we're going to do this job right, I mean, they could never do it for the price of 60 techs.
We
So
just got the 60 techs in the last couple of years.
about 4 years ago.
I remember when I was on the bond committee, we got the 60 techs. That is a question that I ask because a lot of large companies do outsource technology. And as we talk about how we are going to be better at spending our funds, I just think that's something we should look at.
Trustee Bingham?
Yeah, first off, on the Parsons report, I think all of these buildings that we're looking at on the sheet, how were they analyzed by the Parsons report?
Well, the highest FCIs we do have are for administrative buildings, so I think it's around 43% FCI for administrative buildings
All
across
right.
the district.
So when, I appreciate y'all having the map up there to show where all these different buildings or employees are spread out all over the place. When it comes to productivity, it's hard for me to imagine HCM and you've got 3 or 4 or 5 different locations that people have to go into. To me, a one-stop shop is a whole lot better than, okay, now you go here, now you go there, and plus, this is your entryway for new people coming into the district. So that is the first impression of what people are going to have. And our adults are important because they are working to help our kids. I think everybody in this room who is employed by Dallas ISD, the end game is whatever you do for kids. I also know that if I want to buy a car, I can sure buy a used car a heck of a lot cheaper than I can buy a brand new car. And sometimes they're in just as good a shape. To me, this is an opportunity for us to, number one, get our employees into some very workable buildings. I look at the Cotton building and it's a heartbreaker. I know we don't have any kids that are in a building near that condition. But as far as the productivity goes, I have to believe that productivity is going to be a lot better when our people can communicate with each other within a single floor or two rather than having to drive all over. So I think this is a good plan. It gives us a temporary, it's a lease agreement. If at some point the people in Dallas say, hey, we want you to spend X number of dollars on a brand new building, which I don't think that's going to happen, but you know, let's say they do, we can always give up our lease, right?
Yes,
Okay, so we're not bound by it for the next 50 years.
correct.
So I think it gives us a good alternative to combining our resources, and it will help with productivity. So thank you for bringing this plan forward.
You're welcome.
Trustee Moran?
For whatever it's worth, I would recommend not putting a sign on the building.
Okay.
So I'm happy to get into that logic if you like, but
I'm sure the owner will be happy to save those money.
Trustee Blackburn?
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we stay 4 years, we're going to spend almost $8 million on lease plus utilities.
Correct.
And a few months ago, you guys wanted to spend $20 million on a building that was going to cost at least $20 million to rehab.
What do you mean?
Have you looked at any other buildings versus leasing? Because
Yes, we did.
leases are temporary.
Yes.
Sometimes you look at you're leasing until you find something else. So you add the lease amount to the price of the building that you finally get.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's best just to wait a few months or a year to get the building that you want.
We've been actually looking for a building since the Allen King, so that was almost been here almost 4 years. So, and we looked
Other
at
than downtown?
Yes, and so we have looked for buildings that are hard to find, that are certainly reasonable. So we're looking to do the consolidations and help these two departments. We think that it will make them much more effective.
No, I guess I'm thinking about, like Burnett was saying, can you find some place to do everything? And let's not piecemeal it.
Yeah. Well, this certainly gets us towards that goal of getting us consolidated. And it's not the final, and we are going to listen to what the FFTF says, and we'll continue to look for buildings and look for opportunities that are going to be most cost effective. And this is, as I say, this was not our first building that we looked at, but we felt was significant and accomplished what we wanted to accomplish in terms of that goal of getting us all consolidated.
Yeah, I wish you could point us to the previous information where you talked about how much it would cost to build 2 other buildings on the lots that we have, and still keep this building whereby our campus, if you will, is at this intersection. I'm not sure that it's going to cost $100 million to build those 2 buildings. I think I remember that to build a brand new building to hold everybody is going to cost about $90 to $100 million.
Yeah, I think that was, actually it's now over almost 6 months to a year ago, so I think you're going to see that the cost actually is going up. And I think that, ultimately we would certainly like to get everybody together into one building. So, we are looking at and continuing to look at the possibility of building our own building on land that we already have. So we are looking at that, and right now I can tell you that it seems to be the most expensive option.
I know where we have about 25 acres.
Yes, I'm aware of a couple of spots where we've got
And
that.
we already own the land.
Exactly. And it's not, and certainly land in
It's a
certain
little bit
locations is very, very expensive, such as this particular corridor is very expensive. But we've got land in other places, and it's the building cost and the materials and et cetera that drives that cost
It's a
up.
quiet neighborhood.
What are you
Here.
talking about?
The
Sitting there thinking-
Maria Luna building.
No,
We own
it's
that land back, we own that land back
no,
there.
but
He's in Wilmer.
it is a bit south. Now it's in Wilmer and Hutchins, right on the
And we
borderline.
got Pearl C. Anderson, we can tear
Right
that
on
out.
But you
the
were
borderline.
talking about my place, there's 26 acres,
Wanda, you have Pearl C. and H.S. Thompson.
Okay. Trustees on the first round? No? Trustee Jones, did you have any other comments?
I did on the second. So if I understand this right, 4 years, approximately 7.7 million, that's just basically spent. We monetize assets that essentially we're using that capital pretty much to pay for the years, although we get some pickup on savings from offset on operating costs that we don't have on those existing assets, but we still haven't solved the problem. I mean, 4 years later, we have 3 or 4 less buildings that we've disposed of, and we've spent all the money connected with that on these leases, and now we've still got to put a bunch of people someplace. So arguably, if this is a bridge, there needs to be it
Right.
connected to a longer-term plan that solves the rest of it, and then the cost that we're expending here has to be justified relative to the long-term solution. And that's something that I think from an analysis perspective probably should be brought into the conversation. Arguably, the current conditions are not ideal. I disagree with something a fellow trustee said. We do have schools that are that bad. You can look at the Parsons report where their FCIs are as high, and maybe not in the entire campus, but in specific critical areas. We also have a lot of overcrowding still. That hasn't gone away. And we have schools that we completely ignored with the bridge plan, and that's why our future facilities task force work is very critical. But we also have a lot of inefficiency in our administrative assets and a need to come up with a long-term strategy, and I'm still waiting for that. So I appreciate you bringing something that is interim, but I'm still worried about the cost side of it relative to other options, and I think that's what we're hearing here. So perhaps a little more analysis that kind of gives comfort, and then also looking at a longer-term plan, which I think is the critical piece, connected to the short-term bridge, might be a much more persuasive and relevant way to come at this than just strictly saying, here's the interim and we're going to dispose of some properties, and all of this gets pretty much 3 years from now, or 4 years, we're back to square one again. In fact, we're in a negative position because we eliminated key buildings and monetized it and spent the money. So that would be, I think, helpful. I know it is something that requires a little bit of urgency, so I think we can get that going. I think that would help this body be able to really come at this decision a lot more effectively.
We'll continue to work on it.
I have an idea. Can we look at H.S. Thompson? It will hold 1,500 people, and it's at the corner, and it's land, then gut it out and make it part administration building, and it would be beneficial to the community, and it's in use. And I'm so happy that a year ago this board talked about and kept coming to this board saying adult issues, and all we discuss are adult issues. So I'm happy that my colleague is saying adults are here for children. I just want us to remember that when we're talking about our teachers and our staff, that they too are here for our children, and we need to build them up. So I'm so happy that we're all on the same page, that we can agree today that adults are here for children. So we need them to facilitate the learning of children.
Okay, thank you. I share that sentiment. I have a question.
Sure.
The last time we had a conversation, I feel like Groundhog's Day. Last time we had a conversation was on the Pegasus building. Was that ever bought?
No, it hasn't been bought at this point. It's still on a table.
Okay. Trustees, any other questions?
I just have one quick informational. So when you're dealing with a building that's not 100% of our own, that is, there are other tenants, it's a multi-use property, how does security work? Because, I mean, arguably at the
They have security, so that in fact would help reduce our costs.
It's turnkey.
So in other words, in our area, we can set it up. I know also we have the systems whereby people have to key in and out and all of that.
Swipe cards.
So we could retrofit to make sure that's consistent. But also, and I don't think this happens, but in any of our buildings, this is just adults, right? We don't deal with children coming in and out of these types of facilities.
Just adults.
So that's a security question.
Professional building.
Okay. Thank you for that presentation. All right, trustees, we're back to performance monitoring now. We will go to item B, 2015-2016 Student Code of Conduct presentation. Superintendent Miles.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to have Sherry Christian who will make the presentation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi, how are you?
Okay, we're here today to talk to you about the proposed Student Code of Conduct for 2015-2016. I have with me Dr. C.A. Williams, who is our Director for the Office of Student Discipline and Truancy. And once we go through our PowerPoint here, she and I will be available to answer any questions that you have. Okay, of course, our core beliefs fit directly into our Student Code of Conduct and everything that we do around discipline, because we strongly feel like that if we don't have discipline in the campus and in the classrooms, then it would be very hard for our students to be successful academically. And our focus is, of course, to provide interventions and to make sure that we're doing everything possible to have students ready to learn. As part of our process to bring you the code of conduct for this year, we did a survey. Unfortunately, we didn't get as much response as we would have liked to from the survey regarding the code of conduct, so we will continue to work on that effort next year to get more feedback. We had our discipline task force, which we have each year. We shared the feedback that we got from the survey and from the task force with the principals focus group and got some suggestions there, and as well presented that to the district advisory council last month. When we started looking at the code of conduct for this coming year and started talking about the code of conduct, there weren't a lot of changes to the code of conduct, because our thinking is that the code of conduct is once we get to a problem. It's just it lists the offenses and the consequences, but it's not the root of what we have to look at when we're dealing with discipline. So one of the things that we'll talk about at the end, once we talk about the few changes that we have to the code of conduct, is what is our department doing to help schools to be able to manage discipline more effectively. And so that's the thing that I would like for us to spend some time on today. So the major changes this year are listed on this slide, and we'll go ahead and get into those. The first one has to do with students with disabilities, which is on page 7 of the new code. And it basically just talks about the manifestation determination hearings and the fact that those are required to determine if the behavior is a result of the disability. And the law this year changed so that for some offenses related to weapons and drugs, we can go ahead and move the students to the DAEP pending that manifestation determination. We still will move forward with those things, but we can go ahead and move the students. The second change has to do with cell phones, and this is regarding the length of time that the campuses keep cell phones. A couple of years ago, we put some additional guidelines in with cell phones. For example, when the cell phone was first taken, they would keep it overnight. Parents could come in, pay for the phone, get the phone back, or pay the administrative fee, I should say, not pay for the phone. The second time we took up the phone, we kept it over a weekend. Some principals have asked us to not put that in there. For campuses that would like to continue to do that, they definitely have the autonomy to do that. But some principals said that they did not want that in there because they had some kids that had some custody issues, so that over the weekend they might be with a parent that they needed to be able to get in touch with their child over the weekend in case there was an issue. So they asked us not to make them keep the phones over the weekend, to give them the autonomy. So we have taken that out of the code. Again, campuses can still do that, but we're not forcing them to do that. So that basically just gives schools autonomy back. The next change is on page 20, and it has to do with interventions. And this is just clarifying languages for campuses regarding the child's eligibility to receive services and then the development of the IEP. And then the next change is dealing with level 2 offenses and consequences. And we did a few changes here. Well, I say a few, about 3. We added some additional consequences to level 2 at the principal's request. So we added, they can do counseling, they can require behavioral sessions. We put parent conferences there because we didn't have that in level 2, we had it in level 1. And so we just added some additional consequences based on the feedback from the task force and the principals. The other thing that we did here, we were requiring on first offenses for profanity toward personnel that it was an automatic suspension, whether it was an in-school suspension or an out-of-school, and principals asked for autonomy for that. So while they can still do in-school and out-of-school, they're not required. Some said that they would prefer to keep the kids in class, make them do detentions, maybe 3 Friday detentions or 3 morning detentions or something to get the kids' attention and make sure they didn't do it again. But they didn't necessarily want them to be out of class for that. So that again goes to giving principals autonomy. And then the last thing that we added a clause under level 2 that allows campuses to get permission from the superintendent or designee to remove students on the first offense in extreme or urgent situations. So what this does right now for level 2s, you have to have two offenses of the same item. So for example, a fight, you would have to have 2 mutual fights in order to be sent to DAEP. With this clause, we have a little bit of flexibility because in the situation that has become dire or urgent or extreme, the principal could go to the superintendent or the designee and request that we waive that. So that just gives us, again, a little bit more autonomy with our code. And then the last major change has to do with disrespect of school personnel. We see sometimes on referrals where we list disrespect and the question keeps coming up, what is disrespect? We did not have that defined in our code. So basically we now have a definition in our glossary of what disrespect would look like and some examples so that we can define that a little bit better. The last slide that I have here for you talks about the things that I talked about early on. Again, the code is when we have a problem. When a kid gets themselves in trouble and we have to find a consequence to deal with that issue. We want to find ways to be proactive, to deal with situations before we get to the point where we have to go to the code, go grab our code and figure out what we can do when a kid gets in trouble. So what we are working hard with campuses to do is give them some tools, give them the support from our departments of how we can help them better get control of campuses, better have systems in place. So this next page kind of walks you through some of the things that we're doing or offering out to campuses to help the campuses because we feel like we need to do a better job of that. So one of the things is, and I should have said support writing and implementing campus behavior management plans rather than discipline because we want to help campuses before they get to the discipline piece. So while the code deals with kids when they get in trouble, the discipline management plan is supposed to be in place to help us help kids not get in trouble. So making sure we have understood expectations so that kids know what the expectations are, so that they know what the routines are, that we have good routines in place, that we have strong systems in place, that kids know how they're supposed to behave in the cafeteria, they know how to behave in assemblies in the auditorium, they know how to behave walking out to the buses at the end of the day. That's the thing that we need to be focusing on rather than, trying to keep changing our code of conduct every year. So that's one thing that we're working with campuses to make sure they have good discipline or behavior management plans. The other thing that we did last year was adding back for this year an in-school suspension teacher at every middle school. We've worked really hard with the middle schools this year to have a better in-school suspension program now at the middle school so that we're not just having kids go in there and get their assignments done. Once they finish their math, their English, science, social studies, they take a nap. We have a system in there now where we work with the kids on why they're in there. Of course, at some point during the day, they do quickly get those assignments done because it doesn't take them very long a lot of times to get the assignments done that they need to get to make sure they've got everything done when they go back. We also have the counselor and our psych services staff going in during the week to work with the kids because we're wanting to change behavior and stop the repetitiveness in the ISS program. So that's something that we'll be looking at the end of the year to look at the data to see if we made a difference this year or if we had a lot of repeaters again in ISS. We're working with campuses to make sure we have the intervention systems in place so that kids are getting interventions and getting support and changing behavior. Thanks to you all, we had funds this year to start working on some behavior plans. So we have PBIS in several of our schools. We've got our first cohort up and running. We had 11 elementaries, 8 middle, and 3 high schools in cohort 1. This week we have cohort 2 started with an additional elementary school and 5 middle schools. We are working on bringing restorative justice as a pilot program to some of our middle schools. And what restorative justice does, it emphasizes repairing the harm that a disruptive behavior created. So the victim has the opportunity to talk about the harm that was brought to them. The offender has to step up and take responsibility and work on understanding what they did, and then the two work together so that we get resolution. We're really excited about that, and we're working with a plan right now with some middle schools to get middle schools on board to pilot that next year. We're also offering opportunities for book studies with teachers who need assistance with classroom management, so we have a team that will go out and help with that. And then the other thing that we're doing this year is bringing back the group from the Texas Health and Human Services Commission for the Center for Elimination of Disproportionality and Disparities to work with our campuses that need support with regard to African American discretionary removals, because that is still something that we're working with TEA to try to get our disproportionality worked on there. So again, our focus in the Office of Student Discipline and the Student Services Department as a whole is to help campuses figure out how we can help them with managing behavior on the campuses. So at this time, we'll open it up to any questions you have for us.
Trustee Bingham?
When I first started looking at this document, to me it was confusing, and I'm usually very supportive of what the administration does. So I went online and looked at Houston's Code of Conduct, Austin's Code of Conduct, Fort Worth, Garland, Mesquite. I looked at about 8 different codes of conduct, and I got to tell you, their format was so much stronger than what we got. This is a very confusing document. And if you start out, look at page, turn to page 4 and 5. I'm just going to go page by page. We start out and we've got welcome to ISD, we have an overview of purpose, and then we start bumping into the level 1, 2, 3s. And then when you get over to page 5, we talk about different things on discipline, but yet we don't start out with what our expectations are for students. Every district that I looked at, they started out with, here's what we expect our students to do. We want them to be in school on time each day. We want them, it went the whole gamut of this is what we want of our students. And I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail today, if it's okay with you, because I hear a lot of teachers and administrators voice tremendous frustration when it comes to discipline. I think that we've tied their hands a lot, and I think we can do all the staff development we could possibly think of, but if we don't give our teachers and administrators some tools to work with, it's going to be very difficult for them to be successful, and I do think that we haven't done that. So I'd like you just to look at the overall format. In other words, when you start listing the level 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, as we do on page 4, in fact, I think you ought to have a 5th one in there, because I think we've limited it. We need to expand the levels of violations. But I think that should be listed first, and then have your follow-up. Okay, what is a level 1? Here's what they are, and here's what the repercussions are. But it needs to be grouped together, just so that it's easy. Before you can find out what happens with level 1, you've got to go way back in this document. I mean, you're kind of looking and hunting for things. Then when you go to page, you go to page 7. So we're talking about the general stuff, and then all of a sudden, before we've ever talked about the general population on discipline, we're jumping into students with disabilities. And the stuff for students with disabilities is pretty much interspersed throughout this document. And in the other districts that I looked at, they had very concise arrangement, because we all know that the federal guidelines dictate what we are to do with students with disabilities. Why not have that in one location, but have your general population first, and then at the end do your students with disability. But right smack in the middle, we've got students with disability, and we do that for several pages, and then all of a sudden we jump over to page 13, and we start talking about the regular stuff that goes on. No, we're still talking about assignments to the disciplinary alternative. Okay, we jump into the regular type education. There's not a separate distinction on it. You're just hopping around. In this, when we talk about, on page 12, assignment to the disciplinary alternative education program. All right, on that for DAP, it says a maximum of 40 days. Why are we restricting it? Because hopefully in the DAP, we have a very strong academic program, right? And the core subjects are offered. So there are some offenses that are going to warrant more than 40 days. So why are we putting a limit on it? And the other side of that is, why are we going to be jumping a child from one program, one school, into another school, and they're going back and forth, back and forth? Why not leave them in there till the semester, depending on what it is? Certainly if it's a less, something that they've done that doesn't warrant that, but I think we are restricting. If we've got a person who's does repeat assaults and fight, they're out. It's like a revolving door for them. So it says, in here it says, in addition, administrators at DAP will work with the student's homeschool to meet course requirements and allow the home campus to send work to be completed by the student. Are we talking about electives there, or are we talking about core classes?
We're talking about electives.
Electives.
Yes, ma'am.
Because
those AP and pre-AP courses.
Because one of the things is, when you make a choice to not follow the rules and misbehave, there's consequences, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I wonder if, maybe there should be online, maybe you do that online. You take that AP course if you can do that. I think it's very hard for the teacher and for the student to get the same quality out of an AP class with that teacher there versus just sending the work over. I just don't think you're going to get the same type of instruction there. So I question that. Then look over at page 13. On 13 it says, level 2 assignments for all students will terminate at the end of the school year regardless of the number of days assigned. So, and in the second paragraph it says pretty much the same thing. So if I'm a student and I go in and Rena Honey is my teacher and I just take a punch at her and it's May 15th, I get 2 weeks and then it's all over, right?
No, they complete their assignment through the summer school. So we have summer school there, and so the kids stay until they complete their time. But what this is saying,
that wouldn't happen.
We can't roll the kids over to the following year, because then the district gets tagged twice. So we would get tagged for the student being there for 1 year, and
what do you mean by tagged?
We have for our PEEMS counts.
Okay.
So we can't count the students there for this year for discretionary removal for level 2s and count them again for next year. It almost looks like we're double dipping, I guess, for lack of a better term. So they stay through the summer until they finish their time.
So they're going every day in summer, or just through summer school, which is usually what?
No, until they finish their assignment. We have summer school staff there. We have an administrator there and teachers there until the students finish their time. So you might have a student that needs 5 additional days, so they would stay 5 additional days. You might have a student that needs 7 additional days, so they would stay there until they finish their time to be able to go back to the school year, because we don't want them to stop and then need to come back and do 5 days. So they have to stay and finish their time before they can start summer.
And then they go back to their home school where they slug their teacher.
Yes, the following year they would go back. Once they've completed their assignment there, they would go back to their home school the next year.
We've got a lot of empty buildings around the district, or not a lot. Not the Cotton Building, certainly not the Cotton Building. But I'm just wondering, if you have a student who is repeatedly not able to function in a regular environment. I know we've got our overage high school, we have our overage middle school. Is there something that we could do in between that's not the DAEP, but something that could meet the needs? It has a lot of counseling, a lot of help that can help to adjust the child, to help the child, because we want to help them. You don't want to just punish them, but maybe an alternative setting that they could go to in lieu of going back to the home school. I'm just curious, Mr. Superintendent.
I think we can make DAP stronger instructionally and with regard to social services, because creating another facility or a way station or in between, there are things that the principals are doing in-house, like Turning Point or PBIS or in-school suspension, that's really creative. But once they leave the school, that student should get good instruction. I agree with you, Trustee Bingham, that It can't be a revolving door.
Right.
It has to be instructional, and it has to be long enough to where their educational environment isn't disrupted. If kids know they're only going somewhere for 15 days, it's not a waste of 15 days, but it is tough to then come back and then try to catch up for another week or two.
All right, and
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was ready to address some of your concerns when you're done.
No, go ahead, because I've got quite a few more
Okay,
questions here.
what I was going to say, and the code of conduct, we will write it however you all want it, because the current code of conduct is a result of feedback that we had gotten from the board a couple of years ago. The code of conduct now looks completely different from what it looked like before, because we were asked to take several different models, which we did. We took several different models from different districts, and that's how we came up with this one a couple of years ago, was from board feedback. We sat with quite a few of you and got input. We came to the table, and so this is a completely redesigned code of conduct based on the feedback that we got from the board. So if you want us to go back and change it now, it'll be kind of hard to change it for this year because
and
we're
don't
in
do
May.
something
But
just because I'm saying I'm just one trustee, but I would certainly like the administration to look at it again.
We will.
Because if you turn over to page 14, here we jump back into students with disability again. We're doing regular, and then boom, we're back into the students with disability. All right, then we get to our cell phone uses. You know, this is something that I don't know how you handle it, because after all the different school shootings and things, this is something that's out, but this is a tremendous problem at the schools, because you know, we've got, okay, if your phone's taken up one time, the issue that I've seen happen personally is that a principal or a teacher asks for the cell phone, the student says, I'm not giving you my cell phone, and then it escalates up to a whole different level. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, and yet there's nothing. You know, a kid can come in on a dress code violation, and the first day they go into ISS. But on a cell phone, well, you know, you got to go all these different steps. But it escalates where it's just a constant battle with the teachers over cell phone. I can't tell you how many teachers say, would y'all just please not let us have cell phones in the schools? And, you know, I just can't see that happening. But we have cell phones, and there doesn't seem to be anything we can wrap our arms around for the administration in the individual buildings to do anything about. And I don't think they need 3 chances. The other thing is, I think we're a little bit too severe on the first time a cell phone is taken up. I really think if a cell phone is taken up the first time, the parent should be able to come up to the school and pick it up. You know, there's got to be one free pass. You know, that, but after that, you know, just look, it's going to cost you, or if it's a third time, you don't get it back till the end of the semester. But to have 4 or 5 different steps in there, that's very burdensome for the teachers.
Right, and I think that's why it, you know, every year we go through the cell phone thing, and it used to be $15 first time, and every time it was 15, because 15 is the max. And then, you know, the board asked us to go 5, 10, 15, so now we're at 5, 10, 15. So if you wanted us to change it and put the first time, there's no charge, they get it back. The second time it's 5, then 10, then 15. But this is just for the student who turns the phone over. This is for the student who the teacher says, give me your cell phone. They give them the cell phone, they put it up, they pay their $5, they get it back. For a student who refuses, there are consequences. It's not just the 5, 10, 15. So if a student is, you know, defiant and refuses to give the phone, then they go into the levels of processing.
But see, that's the thing. You've got so many different levels in there. And they're really, I mean, I'm hearing this directly from the schools. They have to have so many attempts before anybody can do anything about it. And maybe it's just that you're not communicating with the schools well enough, because administration and teachers, they're very frustrated by this because the students are not turning over that cell phone.
So, Trustee Binkley,
Am I out of time?
Yeah.
can I just respond?
It's unbelievable.
I still have more.
Well, we can go around. We have a
You've
second
never
turn.
run out of time.
Second turn.
We can look at this and beef it up a little bit. In the end of the day, we have to do a better job with the administration and leaders. It comes down to leadership in the school. If teachers want to enforce it and the principal wants to enforce, they will. What happens is they let it go. They don't want to get they don't enforce it right away and it just creeps up on them and they think it's too hard. In my classroom, it wouldn't be a problem, as a teacher. So, and in some schools, it's not a problem. Without good leadership and good enforcement, it's like dress code. If you have to ask whether there's a dress code, then there's not a dress code, and people are just going through the motions. And you see kids walk right by a teacher, even though the dress code is violated, and they say nothing. So there is no dress code in that situation. So both sides have to work hard at this.
And I'll say this about cell phones. We've talked about requiring or having the mandate that no cell phones, period. When they walk through the metal detectors, they take cell phones if they come in. But we have schools that use the cell phones.
Exactly.
We have some classrooms where the teachers use the cell phones as a mechanism for responding to tests, responding to quizzes. They do group things. If there's a student that doesn't have a cell phone, they're paired with a child that has a cell phone, and they can they're tied to the PowerPoints or the gosh, I can't think what it is. They're whiteboards or smart boards, and they respond. The teachers can get direct feedback from who's paying attention and who knows, the answer. So there are a lot of schools that use the cell phones. There are a lot of schools that allow the kids to have cell phones during passing periods because they say that it keeps confusion down in the hallways if kids are listening to their cell phones or doing things, walking down the hall. They're not arguing with somebody and having fights. So we have schools that want them, we have schools
And
that
Sherry,
don't.
I'm not saying do away. I think that's already, it's out there. We can't roll it back where there's none. I know my time is up, and if there's a round one, I'd like to come back on round two.
But I would like to respond to something you said about how busy the code is. Again, we developed the code in this format in this way because it's what we got from other districts that had codes that we kind of modeled after and came up with this format. But what we're looking at doing this year for kids, because we know for a lot of kids this thing goes home, it goes in the trash, it goes away, and then as a parent, once my child gets in trouble, then I'm scrambling trying to find it because then I need to figure out, okay, what's going to happen, where do we go? So what we're looking at doing this year though is doing like a little, which we've done in the past for the adults, but doing one for the kids. It's like a quick reference that basically, like you said, has the expectations that would be in their behavior management plan. It says, what are the expectations at my school? We expect kids to do this, this, and this, like our student core beliefs. Have student core beliefs on there. And then have the levels so that I know if I did this, this is what happens. So it's a quick reference. Kids can go home. It's almost like a refrigerator thing. They can take it home, stick it on their refrigerator, stick it in a little drawer. Then that way if they need it, they know where it is. It's handy. They're not looking for this big booklet. So we think we need to kind of keep the code because it has everything in it. But then that quick reference that's a little fold-out guide that they can have, that they can look at to know what the quick things are they need to know.
Okay. Let's see.
Thank you. Sherry.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you guys for one specific thing. I was really concerned when I got on the board about ISS. And I know that you introduced it, and I told the superintendent that at T.W. Brown, and I had a chance to go over and see how it works, and I think it's a great opportunity for students. So I think not only in the middle schools, but I also think we need to be looking at something in the elementary schools, because as we continue to suspend so many elementary students, the kids are out of the classroom, they're out of the environment, and that doesn't set very well for me. But I want to make one thing perfectly clear. We cannot criminalize these kids. That is not what we should be doing. I think we should spend some time. We got a lot of new teachers. 54% of the new hires. No experience. And so they're coming into environments and cultures because we know that 97% of the students are African American and Hispanic. So we know that teachers need to be trained on how to handle our children. And then the other thing that that bothers me is that we have a revolving door with principals and leadership in the schools. So if you have a revolving door with principals and leadership, then you're going to have a problem with the teachers because they're not going to know which way to go. So one of the things that I suggest is that there be some kind of training that is done every year with the staff in regards to the student code of conduct, and how they're going to handle these children. Because I hear from teachers, they send the kids to the office, and in 5 minutes the kids are back in the classroom. Well, that doesn't work either. Because if one disruptive kid is in there, then the rest of the class is not going to be able to learn. And we have to be very careful when we talk about children that have committed offenses and putting them in DAEP for longer than 40 days. While I understand you don't want them going back and forth, you don't want to keep them in an alternative situation forever either. That's not the best answer for our children. And so, since we're here for children, we need to make sure that we understand the issues of the children. Because a lot of the kids come to the schools with a lot of different issues. And then now that I've said that, got that off my chest. One of the things you talked about was the survey response.
Yes.
And you said you didn't get a good response. So the survey went out to who?
The survey went out to principals with a hard copy so that if there were people who did not have access to the electronic survey, they could have a hard copy. And then we did multiple calls out through our messaging system to parents to let them know that the survey was online.
So the parents were supposed to answer online.
Parents and teachers, staff, community, anyone could go online and answer questions about the code of conduct.
So you do know that a lot of our parents don't have the access to computers at home.
Right, and that's why we gave the campuses a hard copy so that they could pass those out at the campus as well.
So that is if the parents picked up the kids.
Well, if they got them when they were sent home.
So we might look at a better way to engage our parents.
Yes,
and Paula.
And that's what we talked about. We didn't get the response we wanted back, so we've got to do things different next year because we did want to have more feedback.
And we might look at a better way. Then you talked about the discipline task force.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's on that task force?
On the task force, we have community members, parents, principals, APs, and then central staff.
So it's about how many?
This year,
It was about 25, 28 people.
Okay, and how many are parents?
We had parents that the campuses had recommended. Unfortunately, they didn't attend any of the meetings. We did not have a single parent attend a task force meeting.
So there was really no parent input.
Right, except from the survey, except from the survey responses that we got.
Yes.
Paula?
Some ideas.
Again, because we do want to hear what the parents say. I hear the parents, and some's good, some's bad. So we really do need the parents' input.
And I can tell you from the surveys that we got back, you can tell which ones were staff and which ones are parents based on the responses. And a lot of it was, I'm fine with the code, it's just the implementation. That was the majority of the responses. They said, we're fine with that, it's just, fair and consistent implementation was the main thing that we got back.
And some things are subjective, so it's not going to be consistent. That's part of the problem. Do you get many complaints in terms of the special needs parents?
I don't in my office, but I'll have to ask, do you get very many?
No, ma'am.
I've heard some, so I was just wondering.
We get a few, but I wouldn't say we get a lot of them.
And then I guess the last one I believe that I have a concern about is when, this is on slide number 8.
Okay.
The examples are being disrespectful. One of them you list as walking away. Well, some kids are taught to diffuse a situation, you walk away. So that kind of troubles me a little bit because you know, if you're gonna punish them for walking away and they're trying to defuse a situation.
Right. And again, these are just examples, you know, hopefully
But
as
if you have
adults.
it in writing,
Right, but I would think here, you know, it's walking away if the teacher is trying to talk to them and they're saying, hey, come back, let me talk to you, and they just refuse to come back, then that would
you are a thoughtful person. But
I try.
if it's in writing, people will take full advantage of it. And so, not all, but some. And so I would just be careful. The talking back, I get it. Refusing to identify themselves, I get that. Rude behavior, I get that. Name calling, I get all of that. Just the walking away, because some children are trained.
Okay, we can take that one out. That's
I mean,
not a problem.
not just because I'm saying it. I'm just saying that would be an issue for me.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Hey, Trustee Nettle.
Could you guys give us the 22 schools? Did you say 22 or 26 that PBIS is in?
There's 22 currently.
Yes.
Can you
Yeah, we
give
can
us a
get you
list of
those.
those schools?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you talked about civil and something else that you guys are doing. What is
Safe
that?
and Civil Schools.
That's the PBIS.
That's PBIS.
Was it something else?
Restorative
Restorative
justice.
justice.
Is that a different program?
Yes.
Can we get the list of schools?
Yes,
What
but
is
we
the
don't have
outreach?
that one yet. What we're doing right now, we are we're starting with the middle schools to get interest, because we don't force anything on the schools. These are things that we offer and we support. So what we're doing right now is we have a group coming in to talk to the middle schools that are interested in being a part of this pilot. And so once the middle schools come in and we have the list of those that are going to pilot for next year, we'll definitely send that list to you.
And then the schools do we have elementary in-school suspension?
Some elementaries have in-school suspension, but it's not something that we as a department oversee.
Can you give me a list of in-school suspension for elementary, middle, and high school?
And let me go back to
all of high
in-school.
school. I thought we paid for it.
No, let me talk a little bit about in-school. Middle school, we have an allocation, so every comprehensive middle school has an in-school suspension teacher and a room designated for in-school suspension. At the elementary level, I don't think we have any elementary schools that have an in-school suspension teacher. What they do a lot of times is if they put a student if they classify a student as being an in-school, what they will do is send them either to the counselor's office, so they'll have a corner maybe in the counselor's office or maybe in the main office where they have a chair or a desk and they sit there and their assignments are brought to the office and they do them in that office. So it's not necessarily an in-school suspension program with a teacher that is a classroom. At the high school, a lot of the high schools have carved out a position and they have an in-school suspension program. But we don't allocate that position.
Because what I'm very concerned, this is a very big issue, because I'm looking at out-of-school suspension in our middle schools, and they're still very high. Billy Earl Dade and Richards, and you go over, we still have very high in-school suspension. So a lot of our, what are we doing about teacher training? Because once again, as I stated earlier, when you backtrack that, a lot of students did not have a teacher in the room, and then the sub was there and they got put out for out-of-school suspension. So what are we doing to train teachers to behavior management? I actually had to go to a training at Region 10, and they were doing a whole behavior management class all day. So, and teachers were sent to that. And then, so what are we doing to ensure that our teachers, or is that, do you work closely, who's the training, professional development? Is that school leadership? Is that you, Dr. Smith?
Yes, school leadership does, teaching and learning does professional development, this group does professional development. Professional development is done by the appropriate lead,
I understand that, but we need to have a centralized professional development because we have a discipline, classroom management. Because when I look at the high areas of discipline, it's in classroom disruption, failure to comply to directives, and then leaving school grounds. That was interesting. That must be all high schoolers. I can't imagine. So they are things that classroom disruption. That is something that goes back to professional development of our staff. And I agree with Trustee Foreman. We have a lot of churning going on, so a different rules and leadership coming in and out that is a result of Trustee Foreman, Trustee Blackburn, and myself have the highest, once again, I'm on my same old story, discipline issues of in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension. We're in the 800s for 1 6 weeks. We're in 800s in 1 6 weeks. And so, and when I look at Billy Earl Day, there's 201 kids suspended for 1 6 weeks. They're out of school, and they have, you tell me they have an in-school suspension.
Yes.
Only 77 was in school, the rest of them was put out of school. So, you know, there got to be a balance of consequences for the students, but then you got to say, okay, are we training our teachers well to be able to handle? I was in a school in South Dallas. Fraser Court was my hood for 8 years, and it comes with great training and a great principal who know how to redirect a person or a child, and are we doing a lot of that? So if you can give me that data on PBIS, restorative justice, and our professional development training of our teachers and our staff, setting them up for success to deal with our children. I would love to see that, because the code of conduct guides us. It's up to us to do it.
Trustee Jones?
Thank you. Do the students actually sign the code of conduct?
There is a page in there that the parents and the students can sign, and then what the schools do for those that they get back, they put them in their folders, like for example, maybe with a homeroom teacher, or they can put them in their folders that they keep for student life.
But it's not something that's actively part of sort of how we think about setting the school culture and the expectations and the way in which we operate as students or as, faculty, how that's supposed to occur. So it's sort of optional? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, that would be up to the administration on how they require those to come back in, because those are kept at the campus level. So if some schools require that everyone turns them back in, and they keep, sending out something to make sure that they come back in. But I would venture to say there are some campuses where they don't all come back in, and
well, to me, it's not a matter of just signing a piece of paper. It's what does the paper represent, and how does that commitment bind everyone to adhere to a standard or a code of conduct. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, and how that campus embraces that in its culture. I've always felt that when it's discipline and negative, that's sort of after the fact.
Right.
The idea here should be really the other way around, which is to what is modeling good behavior, and then folks sort of check themselves essentially when they go outside of that way of conducting themselves. I've been in a lot of environments that self-regulate, and when it's done right, it really is powerful. And I've seen in certain schools, I've had the opportunity through my Leadership TASB program to tour other school districts across the state, and also nationally and internationally I've done on my own. And there are other approaches here, but they're incorporated into the culture. They're driven by the leadership setting the tone at the top at the campus and the expectations. And when students act out or are doing things that disrupt, it's like everybody owns it. It's not just the one child in the one classroom with the one teacher trying to manage it, or however that works. So I don't ever see any of that in the way we frame this, and I think that's something I'd like to suggest. I know we talk about it, but I'd like to see more of what that would look like. I know I've seen certain campuses through their specific leaders who do that here in the ISD, but it's not sort of what is driven by this particular process of putting together a code of conduct and everybody sort of using this as a guiding manual. And I think if I'm remembering this right, it was the Appleseed Project, wasn't it, that looked at discipline, and in there they also talked about some positive opportunities, not so much the negative, but how do we reduce discipline through other strategies, and I'm not seeing where we bring that in. We always talk about what not to do as opposed to talking about what we should expect, and why, and since we're expecting our students to have high standards for themselves and for their futures, you do have to put a lot of this responsibility on the individual students. and not just to behave and to comply, but to demonstrate the kinds of behaviors that do reinforce their ability to learn and also respect their fellow students' ability to do the same. So that's I guess everybody's got a soapbox here, and I've heard, specifically, I'm glad Trustee Nuttall already covered the numbers, because that was pretty startling to me. But, just looking at a code of conduct, and I appreciate what you guys have done to improve what's in our code of conduct, but I'm still missing kind of the context and the rest of the story.
Right.
Our goal should not be, every time a child leaves a campus, it disrupts their education. We know that. And then we know that when they come back, they're catching up, and there's always the issue of, bringing them back into the classroom and reintegrating and all of that. And that's tough business, right? And we know in-school suspension works as a better alternative because they're still at the campus, but then we also know the campus may or may not be working itself. We may have issues where leadership is unable to control the campus or is inexperienced or, too much turnover or whatever. These are all factors, and they do ultimately impact, I think, how well a system can work. And so I hate to put it all on the teacher or the situations that we're doing from a reactive perspective, you guys and the counselors and others who have to clean up the messes. To me, the goal should be to try to learn why we have so many discipline problems and get ahead of it versus, this. So again, that's my 2 cents worth. I also would encourage that there are some really good examples out there. I know, and I'd be happy to share what knowledge I've got, but I know it's broader than that. But I have seen strategies that have kind of flipped this question very nicely, and they really do reinforce all the values that we're hoping our children are learning, and it allows the children to own it.
And that's what I was going to say. The code of conduct is our standard district book dealing with the standard things. Each campus has their own behavior management system, and our hope is, and our encouragement to schools is to give students some of the buy-in to that. Have the students help you generate what the expectations are, and what we've tried to encourage schools to do is say them in positive ways. Put the expectations out there of what you expect children to do, not what you expect children not to do. So those are in their individual campus behavior plans of, and like I said earlier, what's expected in the cafeteria, what's expected in the auditorium and assemblies, what are those things that you expect to see, and what do the good things look like? So that is what you're talking about, is what you would expect to see on every campus in their plan that they use, that is how they lead their campus. And there are some really good ones out there, that are well written, that the kids had some input in, they feel ownership, and you see positive results from that.
Well, children have to learn to be each other's brothers and sisters keepers. It's, if one fails, then they all need to understand it's a reflection on all of them taken together. But a lot of our children have never learned what is positive, and that to me is part of where, unfortunately, we have to lay some of those foundations and provide some of that structure and provide some of the modeling of what that should look like. So it's a tough thing, but I believe it's part of an education system that's got to be there. Because I think, as Trustee Nuttall points out, you can't have these kinds of massive discipline issues because they are really the things that are impeding education. And we can't be behind it, because then we're never going to help children get ahead or we're never going to resolve the issues. So I encourage, trying to do things a little differently here and bring more of it into, so maybe combining the two things, not just the code of conduct, but also, what has to happen on that campus for those two things to really work. And we're not holding campuses accountable enough, in my opinion. And that, to me, Superintendent Miles, should be something that goes into how we evaluate performance of, he's not here, evaluate the performance of campuses. and can't leave it to the cleanup crew. You've got to basically set the tone and the culture at the door, at the front door, and that has to be managed the entirety of the year. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I've had a chance to work with both of you, and I know that you put a lot of time and effort into trying to get this right, and it's a tough job because it is a big issue. We know ultimately at the end of the day, this stuff drives a lot of the bigger picture for our kids, particularly those that are disproportionately impacted by these policies. I'm going to spare you the data and all that stuff because the data are there for people to see. But I have a list of recommendations that I would hope that you would take into consideration, and some of these are general things that our superintendent can do and that you all can do. Some of these are very clear changes to our student code of conduct. Some of these are a little radical, and so let's just hear them and see what we can do with that. And then some I've actually been able to get from others, including individuals from different teachers associations and things along groups like that I think are going to be directly impacted by this. So here we go. First, I think it would be helpful if this is a serious, if this is something that we are going to take serious as a school system. I think that it should be a core message coming from your office, superintendent. And maybe that looks like a memo to school leaders at the beginning of the school year, at the middle of the school year, and at the end of the school year, saying discipline and our approach to discipline is a focus. And as much as we can, we need to make sure that we are being proactive and not punitive. So those are run parallel to each other. But really highlight the vision and the goal of the district as it relates to educating students and why reducing student discipline is important for the district. A brief summary of student discipline data, just so we can get the school leader can get a clear reminder of where we are with our data. Let's be transparent about our discipline data. Explicit statements in there that positively reinforce other alternatives that we want to encourage. Several examples of things outside of suspension, right? Other things that they can do. So I think that will just at the very least let people know this is on your mind, because when Superintendent Miles says something, people listen, right? Principals listen. This is a serious thing. Yeah. So the second thing I would suggest is hosting meetings, community meetings around discipline, particularly in areas that are disproportionately impacted by student discipline. Let's just have an open and honest conversation about what's happening in our schools, and then work to empower community members and parents and guardians to be helpful and work with us to try to reduce these issues. So you've got your open mics. Perhaps this is just another set of community meetings focused on student discipline and how we can work together. And then finally, on your end, potentially just a user-friendly student code of conduct, right? We've heard it mentioned before. Maybe just a trifold or something that we can just get out there, have them at community meetings, have them at open mic meetings that parents and students and teachers that they can have. Because I know whenever a student gets the student code of conduct, or even when a teacher gets a student code of conduct, you put it away and you never see it again until the issue arises.
And what we would like to do, we are going to do that this year, have the pamphlet that has the student core beliefs on it and then the levels. But what we would like to eventually get to is where all of this is an electronic document it's already online, but where we don't make hundreds of thousands of copies of this, but it's online for people to access. We have a few at the campuses if campuses want them, but really focus on more of the trifold that goes home with the kids, that is what the kids need, because a lot of this, we have to do this because it's the law, but the kids don't care about a lot of this. They just need to know the quick and simple things. So that's what we would eventually like to get to, where we just publish this document once it's approved online, where it's accessible, but then spend our focus on the pamphlet that we're going to do this year that will go home as well.
Right, and again, just to reiterate, I don't even think that the pamphlet is, it should not just stay between a student and a parent and a teacher. Let's have a conversation. Yeah, let's have a conversation about our discipline practices. Let's have a conversation about positive reinforcement. What does PBIS mean? What does restorative justice mean? And how do parents and guardians and community members play a role? So let's talk more about it. Now, when it comes to the student code of conduct itself, I understand. I know if you just make a change in the code of conduct, that it's just print. I get it. But Trustee Foreman makes a good point. What we put in here reflects the culture of this school system, and so we should take seriously what's here.
Oh, yeah.
And we've talked about this before. When I look at this it reeks of punitive language, and it's not your fault. I get it. It's the law. But there's statements that we have in here that says we want to focus on making sure we can build the character of our students, but it doesn't provide anything as to kind of what that looks like. So here's what I think we should do. In section 4, right under the key functions, where it says, there's 4 key functions to the code of conduct, R2, in bullet points, right after that, why don't we provide examples of behavior that build a positive environment for learning?
What page are you on?
4 of the student code of
Oh,
conduct.
okay.
And just provide ways that can de-escalate the issues as they begin to arise. Some of those, for example, and I can send all this to you soon, redirection, talking privately with the student, taking a break, visual prompts and cueing, just a simple conversation, pull a kid to the side, ask the student what is bothering him or her. I mean, I know those things seem so elementary. But if we're not even just addressing that, then if there is a teacher that is going to take this seriously and they look at this and they say, well, I know exactly what you've done, and that's a level 1 offense. Before we even get to that point, let's just have a conversation about what you could do that's not punitive. So that's a change. I'm in favor of going to PBIS across the system. And that costs a lot of money, and perhaps this is the conversation to be having right now. That's a budget conversation, and I probably don't have the full support of the board at this moment because we want to see what the data say. But I think we should go full scale with that. And if you don't want to do that, then let's go with restorative justice, because we've tried our system for years, and I just don't believe it's working. So that's what I would say on that. Here's another piece I would recommend we add in here, because again, this is about culture and this is what people look at. I think that the lowest 25% of elementary, middle, and high schools with the highest number of student discipline infractions, or let me repeat that, the 25% of elementary, middle, and high schools with the highest number of student discipline infractions should have a student discipline advisory committee. And on that committee, you should have at least 1 staff member, 1 administrator, 1 community member, 1 student representative. I think you have that committee convene maybe twice a year, review the student discipline data, make recommendations to the principal on ways that we can continue to reduce infraction and improve culture. If we know that discipline is happening at these schools, why not continue to have a conversation amongst the school itself, make it a priority of what we can do to improve, and have a kid's voice there as well. If I'm not mistaken, the conversation at Dade, we got a lot of great student input. It wasn't easy to hear, but there was student input. Let's not wait until pepper spray is used at a school to ask students what they think and what we can do to work together. So that I would suggest that perhaps we try to find a way to implement that there. Now, I know we can't do that across the full system, and it shouldn't be done across the full system, but in the areas where you have high pockets of student discipline, let's have that conversation with that committee. On page 10, I think we should add that each school shall have a placement review committee composed of 3 members. The committee will determine placement of a student when a teacher has removed the student and refuses to allow the return of the student to the teacher's class. The committee will make a final determination of the student's placement when a student is removed under this section. Page 11. Before suspending a student, other reasonable alternatives will be given consideration. However, it is not necessary that other disciplinary actions precede the use of suspension. I also think that we should have each school make at least 2 community presentations explaining the student code of conduct, specifically targeting parents, community members, and students. And I think that those community presentations should coincide with another school event, so it's not just that we're having a conversation about discipline in a punitive way, but let's have another portion where it's talking about the positive things that are going on in our school system, but let's have a conversation. I also think we should identify and highlight a reduction of student discipline infractions as part of the 2015-2016 goals by doing a few things. Sharing data on our discipline infractions, whether that's through the school website, the ISD website, or perhaps even at the school itself. When you walk into the school, I had a great recommendation given to me just a few days ago by someone who's in tune with teachers. What if we just had a very simple sign when you walk into a school and you see something positive first that says 96% of students at this campus have had no discipline issues whatsoever. And then also right underneath that you just have, here's how many level 1 offenses we've had, how many level 2, how many level 3. If I'm a volunteer or a community member or a parent walking in, that gives me both the positive of what's happening and the areas where we need to continue to improve. At the very least, it starts a conversation. Just a couple more and then I'm done. And this is where it starts to get a little bold, and I'd be more than happy to have a conversation at some point if those weren't already. I don't believe, I want to make it clear, I do not believe that we should be out of school suspending pre-K through second graders. So I think that in our student code of conduct we need to add out of school suspend on page 10, that out of school suspensions are not available as a disciplinary response for level 1, 2, or 3 offenses for students in grade pre-K through 2. And I would also like to add, out of school suspensions are not available as a disciplinary response for level 1 offenses for students in grade 3. I just can't make sense of why we would be sending kids out of school for these types of offenses when they're 7, 8 years old. And when you look at the data, the African American males are disproportionately impacted. I mean, that's pretty much who we're suspending in those grades. It eventually evens out at middle school, but when you look at the curve in middle school, that's where the height of the problem is. But those African American males are getting suspended at about the same rate in the early grades, which creates this cycle for them. And it creates a mindset that they are different. I get when you get serious offenses at that age, well, we got to change the culture in the school system. I'm 28 years old. I'm going to live in Dallas for some time. And I'll be darned if in 20 years I'm having the same conversation. And I'm talking about young African American boys getting disproportionately impacted. I think these are some things that we can do within our student code of conduct. It may not, again, these are my ideas. I'm not an administrator. I'm looking at this at a high level. But I think that we can make these changes. Finally, from a budget standpoint, perhaps we need behavior coaches and specialists in areas that have the biggest that are having the biggest negative impact. That's going to come with money. Maybe you all should think about that. Perhaps not for this budget fiscal year, but next fiscal year. Again, I would be in support of implementing PBIS across the entire district. And then the last piece, final suggestion. TEA and UT Austin are already providing funding to send 30 school administrators and 1 district administrator to training of restorative discipline. Let's tap into that money. I mean, we've got the data to show that we could use this. Perhaps you've already thought about doing that and you know about it, and I'm maybe just preaching to the choir, but I would say you have my full support if we want to go after that money, and if you need anything from me, let me know.
Those models might be mutually exclusive. So you might have some campuses that have PBIS and some campuses that have restorative
justice.
I'm not an expert on it, but I think that those are systemic approaches, so I don't know that you choose 2 systems.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Now, With some of these changes, I need to go back and talk to like the executive directors and the assistant soups, because a lot of this stuff I would hate to put on them without their input. So my staff is going to kill me. But I'm thinking we probably need to go back and bring this back in June. So we're going to be on a real tight timeline to get this printed and out to schools before school starts. But there are a lot of changes here that I can't enforce, that the schools have to enforce, and would be the direction of the executive directors down to the schools. So I'm thinking we need to go back and give them the feedback from the board and see if we can get this done before the end of the month, or if we're going to need to bring this back in June.
Yeah, we'll start by looking at it first, the suggestions, and see what can be done and not, and then get input from people on the road. I mean, a lot of the suggestions are great, but if we had a bunch of teachers here and a bunch of administrators, they'd have some real heartburn with some of the implementation. And so, for example, Trustee Solis, I think a lot of the things you said, it makes sense. There are kids who should not be in a school, even a second grader, at least for a short period of time. The law says no more than 3 days. A kid who is stabbing other kids, who are biting and kicking the administration, and we can put them in a holding cell, rubber room, padded room, something, but anybody approaches them, they'll kick and scream, and those kind of things happen. And you need to hear that from teachers and administrators. And, you know, what are you going to do with that kid right there on the spot? So there are reasons why administrators and teachers, now, kicking a kid out of school because they're tapping their pencil, they're yelling at a teacher, or, you know, the spit on the floor, that's
those,
probably...
Those would be, the examples that you cited would be level 4 offenses, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
You were talking about breaking skin contact.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's a level 4 offense.
I guess I would just say, because we've gone on quite, and I know Trustee Bingham, I'm all about the idea of reform, whatever that means. It's time to reform this school, this discipline system. It's time. And you're doing a great job. You really are. You've given me so much of your time. 4 or 5 months that we've been going back and forth and having these conversations. But it's time. Trustee Morath and then Trustee Bingham, and then we'll close it out.
So you have just a couple process questions. You have a task force that basically reviews this. The task force includes anybody you can recruit to sit on the task force, I'm guessing. One question I have about sort of the way the task force works is do you have people or a person on that task force that is really focused on outcomes research related to different intervention strategies? So, you know, what we know about the restorative justice model and how it works. What do we know about the PBIS system and how it works? The differences between the two. What do we know about classroom management strategies, specific classroom management models, and how that works, and how different ones work, and then what our training system looks like related to all of those things, especially for first-year teachers. The reason I ask is I all of the time that I've spent on this issue, I have yet to sort of congeal around a set of practices that seem to work. And I'm just wondering if we have in the district that expertise that says that, you know, these kinds of techniques work in this situation, this kind of incentive system for teachers, this kind of response to this scenario, you know, various role-playing training techniques on specific interactions, de-escalation techniques. Do we, as a district, even if it's not distributed to our teachers, do we possess comfortable levels of expertise in what the kinds of best practices that work in discipline?
A couple of years ago, we had a task force that came together that had some professors. One, I believe, was from UNT. We had a couple of different professors on this task force, and we looked at those pieces of the work. What was the model that best worked, and what did we need to do differently? And that's where we started coming back to PBIS. You know, because of the foundation that it lays, because of the the way it looks at the campus structure and the different things that are going on in the campus. That was why we keep going back to the PBIS model. The issue is, and I'll just be honest with you, it is the amount of training that goes into getting PBIS up and running effectively.
You're talking about a cultural behavioral shift in a campus.
It is. It is all of that, and it is intense. And so that's one reason we haven't forced it on schools, because you can't do part of it. You have to do the whole thing, and you have to do it right, and you have to have everybody on board. And so that's why we're doing it through cohorts, where we've got the first cohort, we're starting the second cohort. Yes, we would love to have every campus be a PBIS campus, but we have not forced that on campuses. And, you know, like I said, that's the model that we kept coming back to, because it is the most, that we've found that was the most effective and efficient. The restorative justice, we've, you know, just got into that recently. We've sent people to the conference. We found a school that's doing it and is really happy with it.
I know
And
the feds are really pushing restorative justice.
so we're very interested in that. Like I said, again, though, we're putting it out there for schools. We're trying to see who wants to do it, because again, if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it effectively. So
Can you talk to me about what sort of classroom management training looks like in a PBIS? I'm thinking about, you know, reward and incentive systems that teachers execute. Some at very high levels, some, you know, every first year teacher just has to sort of figure it out, because, you know, what you learn in school may or may not work in the classroom that you're in. So what does that look like on a campus where we're trying to take this expertise that we've accumulated and affect that practice? Give me an example of something that we might train a teacher on in terms of classroom management techniques in either PBIS or restorative justice or some other model.
well, with any system for classroom management, and what we actually gave a PowerPoint to HCM a couple of years ago to use with new teachers on the things that we feel like teachers aren't taught in college. You know, that you know, we felt like some colleges just don't train a teacher for the first day of school, because everything that happens in that classroom the rest of the year is contingent on what you do day one. So simple things like having a seating chart. You know, I don't care if it's elementary, middle, or high school. When kids walk in the classroom, they need to know where they go. I go to this seat, there's an activity or assignment that I start on immediately while the teacher's out in the hall, making sure there's nothing going on in the hall, keeping an eye on the classroom, getting kids in. They sit down, they get started on something, and then the teacher comes in and does her little bit of thing and then gets the class going. So it's those things, because a lot of times, you know, kids come in, they want to talk about who's dating who or what happened over the weekend, and then things go from bad to worse. So what are the immediate structures in place in a classroom that get the day started? You
so
know,
how do we conduct training in that kind of how do we get that knowledge in the hands of our first day teachers?
for our new teachers, there are sessions that the new teachers go to before they come to the campus to start their training at the campus. For the campus setting, for teachers that are returning, the principals host those trainings. So if they have teachers that have been on a growth plan or that need discipline strategies, then they do that at the campus level.
And is that, if we're comparing a system, if we're comparing a campus that has restorative justice or PBI, are there other models that we're using besides those two?
Well, some campuses do different things. The one that we're trying to push out from our support standpoint, things that we are supporting, that we're pushing out, we're going with PBIS. Now, there is a model that Region 10 has that is similar to PBIS, that is not as intense as PBIS, that we're also offering to campuses.
So that first day training, does that differ structurally in the PBIS campuses versus the non-PBIS campuses, or is it more a question of content that looks different? I don't know if that question made any sense. I mean, are you doing a different kind of, you know, getting your arms around the campus from a professional development standpoint with a PBIS campus than you are with a non-PBIS campus, or is it what you're doing is different?
Yeah, no, it's what's happening on a campus that doesn't have PBIS is pretty much principal led. The PBIS model is more of a trainer of trainers. You have a team that goes to this intense training with PBIS that comes back and they do an assessment of the school. Like they'll, see what's happening in individual classrooms, what are the hot spots in the campuses, where are the areas where most of the discipline issues take place.
It's a question of the degree of support that we provide to the principal beyond what they would normally do. So in a PBIS campus, you got a lot of staff support sort of sliding in there. In a non-PBIS campus, it's up to the principal to figure it all out.
Well,
Is that a oversimplification, or is that?
Well, even at the campuses that don't want PBIS, if there's something they want, for example, the assistants, if they've got a group of teachers, say you've got a campus that 90% of the teachers do well. They never send a kid to the office, but then you've got maybe 6 teachers that every time I turn around, they're sending a kid to the office. They didn't come with their supplies today, or they were pinching somebody, or whatever. Then we would definitely work with those teachers. If they, let us know, I've got this teacher.
So regardless of the campus, you're doing.
We will help them any way we can. Yes.
Okay. And just to make sure that I'm clear on this, the rollout of PBIS, or Restorative Justice, the Region 10 program, the limiting factor from your perspective is not money. The limiting factor is sort of people. Or is the limiting factor both money and people?
No, we have the funds right now for the campuses that want to participate. It's just if a campus feels they need that and want to be a part of that program, it's up to the campus.
It's a 3-year commitment.
Have we bundled this at all with our? I don't know, this is sort of on the agenda for later today, but have we bundled this at all with our reconstitution plans or our ACE plan? For example, does an ACE campus, do we say, we automatically want you to do this too?
Only with ACE middle schools, we're doing Turning Point.
Turning Point, that's the third one, okay. Okay. Well, yeah, the code of conduct has been an evolving document. I certainly appreciate all of your work on this. My questions, I guess, were a little bit off topic, but when I think about a 4th grader that is being removed from class, to me that is a function of what we did in the first 3 grades, I guess 4 grades, really with that student, in addition to what the student deals with at home. And I think it's a gigantic failure of ours if we have middle school kids that have discipline problems because we just did not do something properly in elementary school with those kids. So we didn't help them from an expectation standpoint understand and understand what's expected. So I completely agree with Trustee Solis's comments that I would like to see real serious investment in this area, and perhaps we could bundle this into the longer term strategic plan efforts with regard to habits of mind and the social emotional learning stuff that we're trying to do.
Trustee Bingham?
Yeah, and I'll condense mine down to 4 points, and I'll eliminate 20 more pages that I had. First off, I hope that next year that we schedule this code of conduct conversation for March or April, so that it gives plenty of time, because it seems like for the last few years we're always right there at when we gotta have it done. So could we think about let's doing this first conversation in March? And that way there is plenty of time. Second, I think there's a lot of us sitting around the table. I'm one of them. I would think it would be very beneficial if we could have a board presentation of what PBIS, Restorative Justice, and Turning Point is, because rather than just kind of piecemeal this together, look, here's 3 programs and you've got schools that are using it and they can talk to us about it, and here's the weak points, the strong points. To me, that would be very helpful. The third thing is, I think, yes, we need to reform, we need to have positive things, but there's always going to be a situation where, as a kid, your mother would say, don't do this or else. And I guarantee you, probably Marath was one of those said, or else what? And I mean, we're going to have kids who
I didn't
choose.
say that, I just did it.
Yeah, you have the or else's there, so we do have to have something in place because we're going to have those students who make a choice not to follow the rules regardless of what programs we have in place. So we can't ignore that, and certainly we don't want to be punitive all the time, and we need things that can direct them in the right path. The fourth thing, and that I'd like you just to take under consideration, we talk a lot about vertical alignment in our feeder patterns when it comes to programs. You know, in other words, we have orchestra at elementary level, middle school, high school. Have we thought about doing vertical alignment with the feeder patterns for our code of conduct and discipline? In other words, maybe the Sigaville feeder pattern wants to come up, their principals get together and their counselors and come up with, look, this is what we'd like to do with cell phones, with, all right, for instance, maybe they say, you know what, we want to do detentions, a 3-hour detention every Friday, elementary, middle school, high school. That's the only time we're going to do detentions, but it's going to be on Friday and it's going to be 3 hours. But at least everybody in that feeder pattern from the elementary schools up, the kids are getting the same message. And if they come up with something that varies a little bit from what the district-wide code says, that perhaps there's some way we can say, okay, you've got a waiver to do this, or as long as it stays within this. But to me, that would be very beneficial because we're given a consistent message.
Well, and that they can definitely do that within the current code of conduct, because the current code of conduct gives quite a bit of autonomy to the schools. So,
Yeah, but Sherry, I'm not talking about the individual schools. I'm talking about the feeder pattern. In other words, all the elementaries, middle school, high school. Those are all on the same page, doing the same thing every day. It's very consistent.
We've avoided or refrained from having EDs direct school principals to do things. Despite what you hear out there, we actually are less of a dictator than your mom, because we want the schools to have that level of autonomy, and we have EDs who have been dictating some things that we don't think should be dictated, like lesson planning, and we've worked hard at that. So I'm not sure there's any reason why a group of principals in a feeder pattern couldn't get together and agree together to say this is what we're going to do, and that would be probably a way to approach that.
Trustee Cowan?
Just real quickly, I've spent a lot of time on this, but I'm just kind of looking at it from a parent's perspective, and to me it looks like we only have one paragraph, and it's a very short paragraph about how parents should direct their questions or complaints. I'm just wondering if we're looking at this as a whole, looking at how to reform our student code of conduct, and we should also consider how to better bring in our parents, especially our single parents or our grandparents, guardians, those who are homeless. How to make them part of the solution and not just your son or your daughter is really a problem in our school. How to make them understand what's really going on, how to give them the support, the guidance, the counseling to work as a team, and not just, your son did it again, this is what's going to happen to him. So I don't know if that's part of these 3 programs, but just from a parent's perspective.
That's part of restorative justice.
Okay. What about the other 2?
Part of Turning Point.
And there's a small component of PBIS that allows that.
It's just we have one short paragraph, and then we have one page up top that kind of outlines the rules and responsibilities of students and parents together. But how many parents really read this? Until it's too late. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Trustee Mitchke?
How many of our schools have none of those 3 programs?
Well, every school has what's called a discipline management plan, that outlines what they do at the school. Now, how they implement the different things and how they provide training to the teachers, it varies from campus to campus. So I can tell you how many are a part now of the PBIS, and then as soon as we know how many are going to be a part of restorative justice, I can tell you that. But I wouldn't be able to tell you how many just don't have anything, because, I mean, they're all doing something. It just may not be a formalized program with a name to it.
And one of the complaints that I constantly hear is that in an effort to make sure that fewer kids get on the pipeline to prison, that discipline problems just back up in the classrooms. And I hear it all the time. And at the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about the foul language, and I've probably heard a half a dozen examples of a teacher relating a story where the child used foul language, got sent to the principal's office, and was then right back up in the classroom 5 minutes later, and not behaving any better. And it would seem to me that if we think PBIS is working, or the other two programs are working, that we ought to be encouraging the schools to choose among the menu of programs that work, rather than being able to just opt out and sort of having no research-based strategy to deal with the discipline issues. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I would. We probably should consider some threshold, because there are a lot of schools that, we have 222 schools, and we're not even talking about the majority here, right? You can go into many, many schools today, and everything's working. Go to Silverstein, go to Burnett, go to John Quincy Island, and you can list them too. And they're not just our magnet schools. And so we don't need to insist on whatever they're doing is working. Their discipline plan is working. There are other schools, though, I think, we know it's not working, or their discipline plan is not working, and maybe those are the schools we insist on something.
Just as a suggestion, again, the 25% threshold that I talked about, and potentially having this type of committee at a school that has a student and an administrator, maybe that's what you use, 25%, the bottom 25%. Maybe that's another use. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Okay, Trustee Morath and Trustee Jones.
I was curious to know whether we've explored a partnership with Momentous. I know they're doing a teacher training initiative with Fort Worth that focuses on not this issue directly, but this issue indirectly, because they might be the leading institution in the state in social emotional learning and development. And so they have, as a result of this, they have a vastly reduced discipline issue, and then they have longitudinal data on their kids that indicate that their kids have high levels of college completion, high levels of college persistence. And they're just in elementary school, so whatever they do in the pre-K 3 through 5th grade setting has long-term lasting benefits. So I'm just, do we have any kind of partnership with them? Are we looking at them at all?
We haven't, but we can.
Okay, Trustee Jones.
Thanks. I was going to actually say something very similar. I think there are a lot of good resources out there. I know when you start to get into the early years, how that foundation gets laid is so important. And I look at programs like Montessori, and it's built around expectations and a cultural discipline that is part of its learning structure. And again, not every child we see in middle school we had the opportunity to work with in early years. A lot of our kids cycle through our system, so know it's not just because we failed. There's kids who come in from lots of different places that don't have the foundations well established. And so we're kind of fighting at two things here. I mean, there's the elementary sort of, how do we bring it more into our system early on so that it builds from there, and that we know that our early year kids are getting the benefit of, really positive reinforcement, the right programmatic. But then if you talk about middle and high school, I still come back to, not every one of our schools is a problem. I mean, really what I'd like to see is a better analysis of middle and high school where you've got the problems. And I would disagree on something that was said here before. I know a specific school, and I'm happy to talk about it offline, that because of a change in leadership, the discipline issue went way up. So, it had a very strong culture, and then it didn't. And because of that change, a lot of what was there that was structurally reinforcing positive behavior went away. And it got a little out of control. And I think, we see those kinds of dynamics because of leadership at the campus level. And we don't have, it's 224, but I would say maybe a quarter of them have what I'll consider to be significant discipline problems. So it's not just looking at the absolute number, but it's the number over time. Because it may be that last year it wasn't a problem, but this year it's a huge problem. So I think we've got to pay closer attention to the trends and the data and what it's informing us. And this year we've seen lots of places where it's really problematic. And I just think, again, we've got to really understand root causes here too. Is it the kids not having enough structure and support? Is it the campus not being able to manage or set the proper cultural dynamics and expectations and reinforcements? And these programs do help, but they don't take the place of relationships and expectations and respect and structure. And kids learn what they live. And I also know, and I'm going to throw this out here because this is one last thing that's been bothering me. We've had a lot of situations recently of teachers who are exhibiting bad behavior. And unfortunately, there's not enough discipline around that, especially on some of our younger, or even I heard the other day about a substitute. That's got to also be part of the cultural point, that there's sort of a zero tolerance all the way around, and we have to be very consistent and even-handed on the enforcement there on both sides. So those are just some additional thoughts. I appreciated a lot of the suggestions in particular areas of focus, but I still think it comes back to being really good about how the campus culture works and the expectations and the leadership and the way parents are also engaged. I remember when I first came on the board, we had a campus where the principal, this was a high school, the principal actually had the parents sign a letter of commitment at the beginning of the year. And it was something unique and not, it was sort of, I guess, part of this idea of conduct. But it was an expectation. It said, we have an expectation for you and your child, and bringing the two together so that when your child is misbehaving, you own it too. And those are brought together. So everybody's sort of in it together. And then the students have expectations for each other. And again, I'm talking at the secondary level, a little bit different than what we would maybe be doing at the elementary level. I've also watched programs like LCC, change behavior. So there's other ways to train better leadership and better accountability for behavior in other forms of how we engage children in what they do for themselves and working with each other. So I also say those are good positive examples that can be also brought into the picture. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Thanks for listening to our thoughts and ideas. I know there was a lot. And keep up the great work. All right. We're now on to item C, Minority Women Business Enterprise Report, fiscal year 2014-15, third quarter.
Trustee Superintendent. I will be presenting for you the fiscal year 14-15 MWB quarter report for the third quarter from January the 1st, 2015 through March the 31st, 2015. It is inclusive of prime as well as subcontractor payment data. The slide that you see before you is the bond program MWB utilization for the 2008 bond program. The payments reflect the inception up to the current quarter. For bond funded construction, we have an MWB goal of 30%. However, our participation is 49%. For bond funded professional services, we have a board adopted goal of 35%. However, our utilization to date is 41%. The next slide before you is simply a quarterly snapshot from January the 1st to March the 31st, focused clearly on construction. Again, the construction goal is 30%. Our utilization for this quarter is 62.2%. For professional services for the bond program, we have a 35% goal. For this respective quarter, our utilization is 15.7%. The next slide is just the quarterly comparisons, beginning with fiscal year 11-12, and included up to today's quarterly presentation, which is 14-15 quarter 3. We're showing the trends on construction as well as the trends on professional services. Trustee, this slide is respective to QSCAB dollars, qualified school construction bonds. For this respective quarter for construction, our goal remains 30%, of course. However, our utilization was 48.7%. Showing the QSCAB participation for professional services, a goal of 35%. Our actual utilization for the quarter was 34.4%. This presentation is actually for goods and services consisting of our general operating funds, excluding anything funded through the bond program, as well as the QSCAB program as well. Of course, our goal is 30% established by the board. We've shown an increase this quarter. Our utilization is 25.2%. However, the board also asked to take a look at those companies that are not certified that the district was making payments to. That was roughly 27.4%. As an FYI, we have personally contacted all of those vendors to encourage them to participate as a certified contractor with the district. And in June, we'll be offering a MWB certification class here at the Dallas ISD as well. And we will once again contact them to encourage them to attend that certification workshop. This slide is respective of the quarterly comparison for goods and services. You'll notice on last quarter, the participation was 16%. This quarter, we're at 25%. Within this time period, we were only able to achieve that goal one quarter, which was 32%, and that was basically due to some large technology as well as food spend during that particular quarter. And the next section below it is simply the QSCAB professional services participation by the quarter. This is a snapshot of your MWB department, our services at a glance. We have before you the board's adopted policy statement. We have some upcoming MWB coordinated workshops, cooperative training session, as well as an MWBE certification workshop. During the respective reporting period, our staff conducted 26 individualized training sessions where we meet one-on-one with the vendors to talk about how to do business with Dallas ISD. In addition to our outreach events and activities, as a staff, we conducted at least 35 of those events. As far as our MWB nominations and recognitions, I'm pleased to say that Ms. Tommy Lau was nominated for the 2015 ASEMA Awards. We also are in the process of launching a MWBE mobile application, which is going to help us technology-driven to assist with educating and informing the community regarding some of our upcoming procurement opportunities. Also, the MWBE Advisory Committee, which was approved by the board, as well as within our board policy. These are their meeting dates and times. They will be meeting here at Dallas ISD, and they address issues on how we could be more effective at implementing our MWBE program. As we've always indicated, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is your MWBE team within the community, working hand in hand with all levels within Dallas ISD. Our trustees, our executives, our superintendent, our purchasing and contracts teams, as well as just a plethora of support within Dallas ISD as a whole. That concludes my presentation. Trustees, do you have any questions or recommendations?
Trustee Foreman?
Thank you. You said, particularly on the goods and services, that you identified 27.4% of minority contractors that were not certified.
Well, actually, there was the delta between that 25.2 and that 27.4. So that's roughly about 2.2% of self-certified dollars that were in there.
So, okay, then I'm trying to understand that. I've gotten lost.
$1.35 million could be attributed to those companies that are not MWBE certified.
But we are counting the dollars.
Well, we show that to the board because you requested it. However, 25.2 is what we actually show you.
Okay.
But then we also let you know that if it had been a utopian type arrangement, it would have been 27.4%.
Okay, so it's only 2% of the vendors that were not certified.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
Trustee Nettle?
On page 8, we reached 27.4%, but I see with the white female there were MWBE contract, subcontract.
Yes, that is correct.
And then what do we do? Because we went from 18%, I think it was 18% to 27%.
I believe it was 16%.
Oh,
or
16% to 27.4%. Where do we spend? What happened in goods and services?
We had some large contracts with food and child nutrition services. We also had some of our temporary service agreements as well. And typically we have a lot of spend in technology. We work closely, of course, with our purchasing team to identify companies to source work with. But it happened to be that within this particular payments, because of those large spends in those particular categories, we were able to show 25.2. And additionally, we took a deeper look at all of the contractors, and some companies did not indicate that they were minority or women. So then we were able to cross-reference it with one of our staff to say, I know this company is minority, let's check to see if they're certified. So when we were able to do that, we were able to get even more dollars to take us to that 25.2%. So we took a closer look at the raw data to make sure that they were properly coded in order to account their participation. But we did ensure that the company was not only minority, but they were also certified.
Okay. Do we ever have any Native American companies that apply?
We have them that applied in the past. We have had some success, but that is an area that we have to continuously market to. We did have a good relationship with the DFW Native American Chamber of Commerce as well, but they are no longer in existence. But we have poured into our advisory committee Native Americans so that they can kind of help us to put a strategic focus on that group. And also we must keep in mind as to whether those companies are really willing and able to do work with Dallas ISD.
Can you send me our potential spend for goods and service? Because I'm just trying to get a feel of what is the potential dollar amount for goods and service, and then I can understand the 11.6% and the 13.6% better. Is that making sense? You're like as a potential 5 million or 5 whatever.
Would that be something you would like to obtain from the budget per se? Is that the type of data you
are?
are?
The budget? Okay. I didn't know what was the potential dollar amount.
I'll look to research and make sure that we pull a number for you and we're able to share that with you.
If the potential dollar amount is $5 million, I would know what the potential money that is, and that, as I said, that 11% will make. It's 11% of, if it's 11% of 10 million or 11% of 20 million.
Okay.
Is that am I
we'll get
wording
there.
your question right?
Understand, I have an understanding, and I'll make sure I work with finance as a whole to make sure we get to their potential biddable opportunities out there.
Yeah, I'm just curious to put a figure. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Trustee Coleman?
Just a clarification.
Yes.
The dollars that you show here are actual payments.
That is correct.
These are
Payments.
actual payments that come during that quarter.
That's correct.
Because
But they're payments to a particular
to
contract.
the company.
Like
The preference is, instead of them, for me, being somebody involved in MWBE for years, instead of them just giving a number, if it's an actual payment, then it's quantified and qualified.
Okay.
That it did go to a minority contractor.
Okay. No problem.
I did that when I was on their committee.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You have a question?
I just wanted to extend a good congratulations to a member of the team who got such a prestigious award. That is
thank you.
tremendous. And also, I know you yourself recently were honored, and I just want to say keep up the great work. It's part of our goals here to make sure we do have a minority women business enterprise strategy, and if we execute on it, we meet our goals. So
Thank you for your kind words.
thank you for your hard work.
All right. All right, thank you, Annie. Appreciate it. Okay, trustees, we're now on item E, legislative update, and I think Paula Blackman will provide us with that update.
Your executive afternoon or evening? Evening, okay.
Evening is after 6.
I'm here to give a legislative update for this current 2015 year. Just so you know, there's about 2.5 weeks left in the legislative session. It ends June 1st. Tonight is a major deadline in the House. Any bills that are not voted on or heard by midnight die. So essentially every House bill that is not passed out is dead. And so Luann is there today. There were a couple of bills on the floor that were being monitored, as well as making sure that bills that are addressed as far as form of amending don't put the district in any kind of jeopardy. So before you is a written report that Luann did compile late yesterday afternoon, because it was such a fluid day yesterday on the floor. There have been some changes. The documents are posted, and it is in front of you as well. And then also attached behind it is our legislative agenda that was adopted last fall for reference. So real quick, I'm not going to read every little word, but I will go over the big items, and then where it is right now, and then hopefully answer questions you may have. And if not, I will definitely get the information back to you, as well as I think we're going to be doing a complete update later in June after the session is over. So House Bill 1, which was by Representative Otto, the General Appropriations Bill, as you can see, it has been passed out of both the House and the Senate, but there are some differences, which means it's in a conference committee right now getting worked on, and hopefully that will be finalized in the next coming days. So there are no final decisions, but they are continuing to work through the differences. HB 1759 was a bill that Representative Aycock, chairman of the Public Ed Committee, presented. Jim Terry did go down to Austin and testify on this bill. It would have added another $800 million to the public education allotment in the appropriations. And right now, it does say it was scheduled on the House floor today. It was
It did come up. The author of the bill, Mr. Aycock, asked for a postponement of the bill to July 4th of 2015, which virtually means it's dead. So there will not be the added $800 million in public education. Pre-K, which was one of our top agenda items this year. Mr. Alan Cohen went down a couple of times to advocate for dollars. And at this moment, we're waiting. It passed the House and the Senate. We're waiting the House to accept the Senate changes. And if it concurs, HB4 will go to the governor to sign. It is a grant option. It is not formula funded. So we will have to adhere to some of the details of what the pre-K program looks like in order to obtain the funding. One thing that is become of an interest more, throughout the session went on was the home rule with the local control. It did, let's see, as of yesterday, it says that it was placed on the House floor for debate, and it was, but it failed 76-59. So it's dead, it's not moving. I do believe that I think it's even in the Senate, it is not there it is right there. In the Senate, it's going to be heard. It was heard in the Senate committee, it's left pending. At this point, what we're thinking is if they're going to do anything, it will be amended to other bills. It's not necessarily going to be a bill in a vehicle. HB 1842, relating to the assessment of intervention and sanction of public schools. It's passed to engross, which means it goes to the second reading for tomorrow, and then it could go on to be enrolled. Texas Opportunity School District, which I think last session was kind of known as the Achievement School District. As you can see, it was passed out of the House Ed Committee on the 5th, May 5th, and is now in the calendars. Essentially, as I said, tonight at midnight they die, so if it's not heard today, in which it is not expected to be, it will be heard. We did provide written testimony on this one, just advocating what we do now for our struggling schools, and it was well received by our delegation as well as the committees. SB 669 West's bill is similar to the one that DeShuttle had proposed. Passed at the Senate on May 7th, and it's waiting and then it moved over to the House Pub Ed Committee, and it's waiting for a hearing. None has been set at this time. So then the Accountability AF campus ratings is on the floor today. It didn't make it through the through the agenda last night, so it's rolled over to today. And we're thinking it's probably not going to be making its way through, and it will be tacked on to another bill. And then the graduation requirements. This is one that has been passed out, signed by the governor on Monday, and it is effective immediately. And I know if you have questions about that, Dr. Smithsco and her team has been preparing for this, and she can give you some details on what is in store for that. And then vouchers, and it was they didn't call it vouchers this session, but it was heard, it's moved through, it's passed through the Senate on Tuesday, it's in the House and Means Committee, it was referred to the House and Means Committee, and it hasn't been set at this time, but because it is a Senate bill and it's in the House, it's still technically alive. Because it does not die tonight. It's a Senate bill. So it does not die. These were the big rocks that we really focused on, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions or get any information back to you if I don't know the answer.
Okay, thank you. So Trustee Mitchke and then Trustee Foreman and Trustee Jones.
Yeah, my understanding is that pre-K bill is rather puny. Is that... or you can characterize it however you want.
We appreciate the legislature taking a look at pre-K and helping us.
And how much is the bill for?
180 something, hold on, where is it? 130 million for the biennium for 2 years, so it's 65. Yeah. If you want to get more detail than Alan can really get, but we appreciate the legislature for any help.
We'd like to appreciate them more than we do.
Yes, sir.
And in terms of overall funding for public school education, where do we see that?
As far as, well, I mean, the layout is right here. They're still working it out. There's no additional money. It's going to be just the 2.2 billion that is added, but there's no. I couldn't give you the details specifically, but it's the comparisons right here.
Yeah, let me make it a more general question. Do you think the cuts that were made in 2011 and partially restored in 2013 will be fully restored by additional funding this year?
Jim is the expert on.
Not being a politician, I can't tell you exactly what will happen, but I think that the House version puts 1.1 billion back, and the Senate version puts 1.1, and the House version puts 2.2. It'll go to conference committee, and so somewhere between is what the real number will mean to us. If you remember the last legislative session, they restored 3.2 billion. So, and the previous legislative session to that, they took away 5.2 billion. So, 2.2 billion would put us back to where we were, whatever that is, 6 years ago. But you must remember that since that we have grown exactly. So it doesn't really catch us up, but it puts us closer.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Foreman?
Said HB4 was in conference committee.
It's right now it's the House has to accept the Senate changes. So, and if it doesn't accept it, then it will go to a conference.
Okay, so
if it
by
accepts
midnight tonight.
No, it won't die. It's fine. So right now the process is if you have, it's been heard and it's passed both houses. So any bill that's still in play is fine. If it hasn't been passed out by the House by tonight at midnight, it's dead. So it's still a bill where there is differences. If the House doesn't accept them, it will go to conference, but it's not dead. If the House doesn't accept the changes.
You said that, I guess it was House Bill 1842 for the opportunity districts that we had a written testimony.
And it was actually 1536 and Senate Bill 669. Yes.
Could I have a copy of the written testimony?
Sure. I thought I had sent it to you. Okay.
Did not get it, and I'd like to know what that.
I'll send it to everybody.
Testimony. Yeah, send it to everybody if you want it. And praise the Lord, House Bill 1798 failed. Praise the Lord. I am so glad to know that. And I watched part of the proceedings, and we do owe Representative Alonzo a great deal of gratitude for working to make sure that that didn't happen. But I have one other. That's all. Thank you.
Trustee Jones? And Trustee Now.
So, just so I understand, if a House votes it down, any item, so they take a floor vote and they say no, and there's a parallel bill in the Senate, you made the assertion that that bill on the Senate side could get tacked onto something else, but if the House has already said no, then it still has to pass both bodies in some form.
Right.
So then it's a different dynamic, but still.
You play defense at that time.
Right. So how often, I mean, from the Senate side, if we're looking at some things that the House either rejected or the House didn't get to or whatever, You were saying that, for example, there is still an opportunity on, what is it, 669? Or, sorry, wait a minute. Resolve for me what's going on with Texas Opportunity School Districts. I'm sort of unclear where the two now, because 1536 is, if it doesn't get heard, is dead as of tonight.
The
Right?
House bill is.
Right, but 669 has not been set for a hearing.
And it's still in play because the Senate bill is not dead in the House side. So it's past the Senate and it's over into the House and it's in the committee. And so it's, because it's a Senate bill, it's still got, what is it, 8 more days before it becomes, before the Senate bill has to be passed out. So it can still be heard in the next coming days in the committee.
Okay, so if it were to do so, you would be notified, or we would have some understanding that was going to be scheduled or otherwise coming up. I mean, you guys are still tracking that.
We're still tracking that one.
Good, and notifying accordingly when these high-interest bills are coming forth. And then you also said on 2804 that it never, or what happened, it was placed today and then it didn't, it was on floor today and then it didn't pass, or what happened? I'm sorry.
Well, it's being debated. Right, this is the A through F. So what the original bill was, it's just being debated today. I don't think this is the original bill, is it? It's just been, it did not, it was on the calendars for yesterday. However, they didn't get through their agenda, so it's rolled over to today. And if it doesn't, I don't know where it is right now today. If it doesn't get debated and voted on, it will die.
Right.
But it still could be tacked on to other bills.
Well, but if it was tacked onto another bill, wouldn't have had to have been, I mean, okay, so anything technically that dies can be tacked onto another bill. I mean, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
So I want to be clear that this isn't, because the Senate hasn't taken this up, so there's no parallel bill in the other house. In the other body, excuse me, not to confuse us. Okay, and there was a whole other category of bills, and I know tried to keep y'all apprised of what's going on with the exemptions and the relationship on the funding side. Many of those have gotten movement on the homestead and some other areas, and I know that's there. I think that should also be added to something that's important to this body, because it will affect ultimately our revenue and relationship to our total funding for next year and in future years. And given that we've had high growth and we're also potentially looking at a bond or TRE, it's going to have some fairly strong implications. So, and I'd be happy whatever I've got to share, because we get all of that information pretty regularly, and actually I get it daily now. So I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Trustee Nettle.
SB 149, can you clarify how that's going to look for this new graduating senior class?
For the current senior class, there's one more opportunity to take the end of course test in July. So it'll affect those students who don't pass in July for the August graduation. So that's kind of how we're seeing that. In other words, there's one more chance.
They won't get to graduate in May.
So the students who didn't pass all of their EOCs by May will not get to graduate in May.
So how?
But then we'll put the provisions of the bill in place. If they pass, but if they pass their EOCs in July, they'll get to graduate in August because they just passed their EOCs as they needed to. But if they don't pass those EOCs in July, we're already working with the principals to have the individual graduation committees convened for those students to have an opportunity to graduate despite not passing one of their end of course tests.
Because it says for the 11th and 12th grade students who have failed to pass no more than 2 of the 5 required end of course tests, or at the end of the student's 11th grade year. I was under understanding that this current senior class, that if you failed no more than 2,
right,
you could graduate.
Well, you might be able to graduate if you complete the requirements for the individual graduation plan. In other words, it's not an automatic. There are requirements, and there's a graduation committee that takes a look at what you've done.
Have they given the detail of this bill yet? Of how it's
We'll be glad to give you a...
I mean, this is just done because I'm, a lot of parents are under the impression, and I need to clarify, a lot of parents are under the impression that their students, now I'm really confused on why they're lowering the standards, but hey, that's down in Austin. And I guess they realize that a lot of parents are under the impression that their students will walk in May with the graduating class, because this bill said that they, in the papers, and everybody's saying that they will get to graduate. And now you're telling me there's some carrots to this. Can you please give me that in writing, because parents are under the impression that, you know, they can graduate.
We will get it to you in writing, but we're, as importantly, we're working on the communication that will go out from each campus to the parents of seniors who are eligible, potentially eligible for this graduation.
So they still won't graduate in May. So
they will not graduate in May.
They have to go to summer school, and they still have to. They took the test already.
They took it once in I forgot now.
No. The retesters.
I know.
This is going to. There's 1,095 of them.
So they took 25. Yeah.
25. So 1,025.
We'll know at the end of May how that group did.
Well, they send those results a little early because graduation starts on May 29th.
We'll know right as it's happening. As you know, it's always a nail-biter.
Some of the results should be here next week, right?
So we'll know soon.
When is the STAR test results going to be here?
Well, we say end of May. Sometimes they do get here earlier.
Okay.
It's always right there at the right at the last
I know they give the seniors a little early. So the senior class, the 1,025 seniors that we have there, they will not get to walk with this May 29th, 30th class.
Unless they pass all their EOCs.
Unless they pass all EOCs.
Yes.
They will not get to walk.
That's correct.
Well, I think Austin has confused a whole lot of people.
I think so too.
And I'm confused. And I think there's going to be a whole lot of seniors crying. Have y'all made this announcement to the seniors, the 1,025? Have you had individual counselors talk to them?
We're working on the plans. We're getting the letter ready.
I think y'all need to do that like yesterday. Seniors, they've ordered caps and gowns. They thought when the bill passed, and they passed, they were only lacking, they thought they could graduate.
The bill only creates graduation committees. They've left it to the districts to figure out how they work.
Right.
We were hoping that they wouldn't pass it this year to be relevant this year because we knew we'd have to scramble. So we've been busy trying to put our own plan together on how these graduation committees are formed, what the criteria are, and things like that.
Please give me the details of the bill, because there's a lot of seniors who are going to, they was thinking that they would get to graduate in May with their graduating class.
Send it to you tonight. We'll send you the bill tonight.
So you're telling me they have to take the test again in June, and they won't walk. They'll be a summer graduate.
They'll be a summer graduate. Or they might not. If there are some requirements.
If they don't pass in June, they still won't graduate?
There are requirements for the individual graduation committee as well.
Give me that in writing. Oh my goodness.
It's not automatic, trustee Nettle. It is definitely not automatic.
The news came out. Yeah. It confused a lot. A lot of people are going to be confused.
We'll get information out.
Okay.
Great. I have a quick question on the testimony that the superintendent provided as it related to evaluations. What did that anything ever happen from that particular discussion?
832.
I think it's not on here. It's not moving. I'll have to check on it.
Okay. Just wondering. Trustee Jones?
Yeah, just for my edification, as I recall, I believe on the issue of 1798 and 1012, did any school districts testify in favor of it? Because I know TASB and TASA were against on both, and pretty strongly. So, but did any individual school districts say they were in favor of it?
I do not believe so.
And TASB and TASA were very much
again.
Right, and I think TASA was too, the School Alliance. There were quite a bit of
Trustee Joe, which
organizations.
bill are you talking about?
I'm talking about the home rule local control
HB,
district.
did any school board members testify in favor of it?
According to the public record of witnesses, there was,
Which school board member testified in favor of it?
I believe it was one of ours, Trustee Morat.
And so what is our, you can testify as a school board member?
I believe he testified as a private citizen.
Okay, so but he listed as a private citizen, not as a school
He was
board member?
listed as a private
Because
citizen.
we as board, I thought we went as a unit, as one, in favor of things, not as a board member.
And I was not aware that he
We
was
need to
down
deal
there.
with that in policy.
Okay, in policy, okay. We need to deal with that in
But
policy.
just for the record, no school district, no superintendent, no entity.
According to the witness lists, there was not.
Great, thank you.
All right. Our last item is the quarterly business expenses for Mike Miles, Superintendent of Schools, from January 1st, 2015 to March 31st, 2015 per employment contract. Superintendent Miles.
You have the documentation, can answer any questions.
Questions?
Could we just have a breakdown, Superintendent Miles? I got this, just a breakdown of, I'm assuming you went to some conferences.
Yes, so you don't have a breakdown.
I do not in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
So
send
just,
it to you.
yeah, just a breakdown. That's all here.
Thank you. Okay, now we're on the policy updates. I knew we'd get there before 7. I told you. The trustee Keller, would you please lead us through the policies? I win that.
There's several were full.
Yes.
Start with DEA, compensation and benefits, wage and hour laws. Brought to you by Carrie Chapman. This is a second read. Expected action in May.
Page. Okay. This is adding language to DEA local regarding the topic of separation agreements. And this essentially states that the district can enter into an agreement with a current or previous employee as a condition of separation, and then adding the subtopic payments that may, the separation agreement may include voluntary or involuntary termination, and that the payment could be made in whole or in part. And then a second paragraph that references settlements involving assistant superintendent or higher positions be referred to a third-party attorney obtained by the superintendent, and then the attorney would make the recommendation.
Is this the policy that we were discussing, that Dan Mishke came forward with?
Yes.
In
It is, yes. In February. So should Dan Mitchke be here defending this?
We can defend it.
Trustee Warner?
Thank you, Trustee Cowell. I'm a little concerned with the language because I thought it was the intent of the board that these payments would come back to the board for approval. There's nothing in here that says that, particularly at the cabinet level. So this pretty much takes the board out one more time, and we then hire a third-party attorney to come in, and I won't be supporting that because we went through a critical situation regarding this, and we talked about as a board what we'd like to see. Everybody never agrees, that's okay. But I think the majority of the board wanted to make sure that this came back. And just the first sentence makes me nervous the district may enter into an agreement with a current or previous employee. Now, why would we be entering into an agreement with a previous employee?
It's, whenever we have an at-will employee, we can actually make a termination at that particular point. They then have an opportunity to grieve that. So during the grievance process, we can enter into an agreement with them to settle on an agreement.
And their status at that time is that they're no longer an employee.
Still makes me nervous. Just on the first read, that makes me nervous. Then the second paragraph talks about separation, settlement, severance, or similar type payments or arrangements, including compensation, benefits, or other concessions. What other concessions will we be talking about?
We have concessions such as often employees say they want to be coded as eligible for rehire. They sometimes say things that they want a neutral reference. So it's different things that attorneys or other people may suggest that they enter into.
So,
Not monetary.
If an employee is an at-will employee and we're getting rid of them, we always code them as not for rehire?
Yes, for more, I mean, we have in our policy DC regulation, there's certain reasons that we do not allow people to be eligible for rehire.
Okay, I'll just have to look at DC regulations because that doesn't make sense that every employee that leaves here, we code them as.
No, if they're terminated, not if they resign.
You got something?
No, ma'am. I'm just looking on with interest.
Okay, because I'm really kind of crazy here.
And Ms. Horman, that language actually is going to come up in policy DC that we're looking at in just a few minutes.
And I'll probably be concerned about it in DC
referencing your
too.
question there.
Because that leaves it too open-ended as far as I'm concerned in terms of what we're doing. And then, of course, the last paragraph. Any proposed settlement involving an assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent, or a cabinet level employee will be referred to a third-party attorney obtained by the superintendent. That is unacceptable. That is not what we spoke about when we had the last situation with the last situation with HR. You know, there was a conversation. And the conversation was is that the board wanted to be able to have those brought before them. And I remember that conversation very well. As I said, Nancy, everybody don't agree on this board. But there
I
was
didn't say
you were looking
anything.
at me, so I just wanted to make it clear.
But I will. I'll say something here.
Yeah, you were
Give me a
looking at me,
moment.
so I wanted to make it clear. And then the last thing that bothers me somewhat is that, and the question has come up about telecommuting employees working off-site. And I don't see any guidelines. All it says is if your manager decides that you can do that, then you can do that. And
We have some guidelines in the regulation regarding that component of the policy.
There are guidelines?
The board actually approved that policy about 6 months ago. I think it was before your time.
Every year.
Well, it may have been real close to it.
Yeah, but I don't remember it, but I remember the conversation about those employees and how many employees it was, because we're just talking about how employees need to be together and spending more money to bring departments together, and then we're still talking about having people working off-site. And there needs to be a clear understanding of what that means. Thank you.
In that last paragraph that says any proposed settlement involving on that paragraph, I read that last sentence in there. It says this attorney will provide a written recommendation. So it still involves, I'm assuming that means referral to the board as we talked about. But they're going to give a recommendation. No?
No.
Okay, tell me what it means.
It basically means that once the attorney is identified and the attorney makes the recommendation would go to the superintendent.
And at that point, but there was a conversation where you would talk to the board on settlements, and maybe I'm just not remembering correctly.
I think the conversation, and I'm having a hard time remembering too, but we talked about it being part of my contract right now.
Yeah.
So remember, both parties would have to agree to that.
Because there are, well, because there are times where, with a settlement, I mean, and we've all sat around this table and seen this, where, yeah, you can say, okay, we're going to fight it, and it ends up costing you a heck of a lot more money to fight it than it does to say, okay, 3 months severance, or until you've got X number of years in for, you know, you want to go to January, you get your years in for retirement. So, okay, I understand that.
If I'm not mistaken, the board will correct me, that the real intent is so that it doesn't become politicized and there's no favoritism, there's no conflict of interest. And that's why a third party would benefit in those situations.
I think the spirit of our conversations was to provide a layer of protection for both administration, board, employee, but in this paragraph, it doesn't appear to go that far or go far enough in that respect, because a third-party attorney is obtained by the superintendent. So that doesn't give the perception that we're being truly as independent in this matter that we want to be. Trustee Jones, could you?
Yeah, I just kind of comment on that. You know, you want to also avoid self-dealing, you want to avoid conflicts of interest, and you want to avoid situations where there may be conflicting interests that may arise through litigation or through other things that, you know, could be under investigation, for example. I think when it relates to a direct report to the superintendent, and if, as we had once before, a direct report, you know, filing a claim or taking an action, and there being an investigation, I don't think it's in anybody's interest to, first of all, allow two parties to settle it outside of the light of the board knowing about it, and then if there's any kind of settlement, and if that settlement includes releases, then certain conditions are then present in parties negotiating things of value outside of the board's knowledge. That's wrong, and that should never happen. And I think that when we look at, depending on the layer of who's involved and what the circumstances are, these settlements are never small when they involve people whose salaries and benefits are of large amounts. The issues that may arise, I think, can be of great interest to a board, especially when you get into areas of risk management and liability and other parties that may be embedded. So I think from the standpoint of just prudency, there's got to be more checks and balances than what's here, both in terms of disclosure. The board should know no matter what, and a board should not be surprised. Second of all, if negotiations are happening, then I presume our general counsel is also a party to them, not just the superintendent. And third, if a matter is under investigation and hasn't been resolved, it seems to me you shouldn't be releasing somebody from liability or negotiating any kind of settlement. And the opening sentence, to me, is equally problematic. If it is in the best interest of the district, well, it's, you know, what does that mean? You know, define best interest. Best interest is always managing risk and cost and liability and looking at the relationship across the things. But until it's laid out, it's quantified and qualified, you know, that's indeterminate. So I think in this case, I think the original spirit was to make sure there was transparency, to make sure the facts and the circumstances did not involve conflicts or related issues of liability that the board was otherwise not apprised of, and that any settlement that happens be done in such a spirit that it makes sense, but then there's validation for why it makes sense. And there's some way in which that's laid out, and everybody is satisfied that truly is in the best interest of the district. So I do think it should come back to the board for approval, especially when we're talking the senior, and especially when we're talking a direct reporting relationship between the superintendent and somebody who is the direct report to him or her, or to your CEO. And I also think there should be a clause in here: in no case shall a settlement exist if there is any pending issues, investigations, or other things that need to be resolved before a settlement can be reached.
Trustee Nixon?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, does the current draft require the board to approve a settlement payment or a severance payment with respect to these senior level employees?
Based on the current wording, I would say the decision rests with the superintendent.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest that we amend this to require board approval. I don't mind limiting the category of personnel that would be subject to this approval process. And I think having the third-party attorney recommendation is a necessary element. But I would like to see this, and this is essentially what I proposed several months ago, that the board have to approve those settlements. I think just leaving at that, I wouldn't add what Trustee Jones referred to, which was if there's other investigations or litigation or something else out there. There's always something else out there. That's why you're settling. So, because there's always, if you litigate, that's out there. So you can't, you don't need to settle if there's nothing else out there. So that would be what I would propose, and I can either offer that at the board meeting, or the administration can take that under consideration and incorporate it into the change. Yes?
If I don't know what this is, a point of information, but if you wouldn't mind sending language in to on that point to Faye, so that they can sort of vet it, at least run it through our legal counsel.
Yeah,
and
I'd be happy to do that.
And then if the administration wants to add it, they do. But at least if they don't, that way when you bring the amendment to the table, then it'll have been processed by our legal folks.
Okay.
Also, could we make sure there's not a conflict on the superintendent's contract on what he can and can't do, which pertains to this?
Well, I think that would be part of that legal review. Yeah.
Okay.
We can be ready to vote on this by the end of this month with preferred language.
Do we need to put it off another month?
I'm fine moving forward.
I don't think it would take me very long to propose some language and get it to the administration to look at. And, like I said, whether the administration adopts the language or not, the amendment would be a pretty short amendment if we did it at the board table.
President Solis, it may not be a bad idea to have our board attorneys review it as well. Any language that comes, especially from us. Okay.
The drumming.
Moving on.
Drumming turned down for what?
Trustee Jones?
Yeah, it's really more of a point of information. If something comes in that has specific language that is very distinctive, to me that's not a second read. That's a first read on something of substance. And I just would ask that be considered a first read because of the nature of what you're now amending and developing and trying to formulate.
Could we just put it off another month? June, so we can look at it again.
Till you.
Is this first read or second? I don't remember reading one, period. This first or second reading? Because I don't remember
This
reading
is
that. Second read, but I guess none of the recommendations.
Sort of the third read, actually, but we just sort of skipped one more.
But I don't remember these recommendations, so it's really kind of the first read because administration didn't come with any
Just
recommendations.
keep in mind that June we approved budgets and what other facility naming, and as long as we get it done before summer, I think that's most important. President's list.
Yeah, I think we just move forward with it. If you can get us the language, let's do it quick.
Yeah, I can get the language to you, I think, in a timely manner. And I have no real preference between May and June, so I'm happy to go either way on that.
Yeah, I think let's just work to try to get it done in May. And Trustee Mishka, if you wouldn't mind sending it to our board attorneys as well, as you'll be crafting that language, you're going to send it to general counsel or to Faye, so that way they all get it at the same time, rather than you forwarding it to me and then me forwarding it to them. Just knock it out that way.
Okay, no thanks.
Okay, next up, FO, Local Student Code of Conduct, annual review of the Student Code of Conduct. Just had a large discussion about that. Any questions? We're ready to... Yeah, that's a first read, so although on our sheet it says first reading with expected action in May, board and come back with other recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, BDB Exhibit Board Internal Organization, Internal Committees, recommended by Trustee Mitchke and Trustee Blackburn. Trustee Mitchke.
Okay, I'm not sure we came to a consensus on all of the language that's here. I believe the thrust of, and Dr. Blackburn had drafted most of this language. I think the thrust of the language changes is to involve the whole board in audit committee related decisions more than it currently is involved. And so there are a number of changes that have the audit committee, instead of making a determination that is essentially final, instead making a recommendation to the board as a whole. Yes, Mr.
So that was my understanding of the intent of Dr. Blackburn's language, but the language appears to not actually accomplish that. And so I'm concerned. For example, at the top, one of the things it says. I'm sorry.
Are you done?
Oh, yeah.
Are you yielding the floor? Are you done?
I'm not done. Is that the official
Yes.
technical
Are
term?
you done? Yes.
Our
rules of order language, yes, sir.
Done. This is Eric's rules of order. Okay. Yes, I'm done.
Sorry. Got a little rambunctious there, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So for example, under the authority section, it strikes through approve the annual internal audit plan and all changes to it, which would seemingly remove the authority of the audit committee to approve the annual internal audit plan and all changes to it. And I go about 3 pages into it, and at the bottom of page 3 of 5, it says approve the annual internal audit plan and all changes to the plan. Review the internal audit's activities performance relative to this plan, which in my mind doesn't change anything. The audit committee still has the exact same power as it had before. It's just the wording is in a different place. What I was going to say is I think I would recommend that this go back to the audit committee to be chewed on sort of until the language is perfected to the satisfaction of the audit committee to accomplish whatever objectives you guys are trying to achieve. That was essentially my recommendation.
I'm okay with that, or if we just put it off one more month, we can come with, I think, new and improved language, which I think was Dr. Blackburn's intent after our last audit committee meeting. So I think this language is actually language that we looked at in the audit committee, had some discussion about, and talked about giving a homework assignment to Dr. Blackburn to incorporate the changes, but what we're looking at doesn't incorporate the changes that we discussed. So I could go either way on it, either.
I think it was just as a matter of process, because this is our only standing committee, that the committee should be happy with the language before presenting it to the board. So I think the way to do it is just perfect it in the committee, make sure you guys are happy with it, and then bring it back.
Yeah, we can do that.
Trustee Foreman and then Trustee Jones.
Trustee Nick? Is the new language changing the audit committee doing investigation?
The audit committee. The audit committee doesn't do investigations, but I think I think the language that you are referring to is in some other policies that talk about the authority of the internal audit department to do investigations and the authority of human capital management to do investigations. Though I don't think that is included in this language on the audit committee itself.
So the internal auditor will still do investigations as opposed to all of the investigations rolling over to human capital management?
Right. My understanding of this, and I'll take a quick review of this one when it's.
Well, we got Mr. Singleton, maybe he can come up here and tell me.
But there are some pending proposed changes to the other policies, and what are they? DH local and
DH local, CAA local.
Okay.
And so what are the changes in regards to your position and doing investigations?
Well, as a point of order, since those aren't actually up for discussion.
It's in here, so they are up for discussions about they're going to do investigations. Excuse me.
So as a point of order, I don't think those comments are specifically germane to this amendment.
If it's in the policy and the policy's posted, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Those other policies are not posted.
The other policies are not there for this meeting.
But it's changing, this document is changing what his responsibility would be in terms of investigation, and that's why I asked that question.
I actually don't think that that's the case. But the issues that you want to discuss, we will be discussing, I guess, at the next board briefing, when it's DH local and CAA local. Is that right? Those are the ones that impact.
It says in here, the internal auditor will do investigations as needed.
Where?
You guys make things so complicated over for nothing.
Here we go. Joyce, right. It's
On the first page?
somebody right here.
There is
Stop the driving. Okay, right here, Joyce.
Okay. So it says it will perform investigations as needed. I'm trying to find out what that means.
If it's in the policy and it's posted, you can talk about that.
Withdrawn.
You look at page 5, so 5.
Yes.
As I would interpret that, the audit committee would institute and oversee special investigations as needed.
So does that
doesn't
change what
necessarily-
you're currently doing, is what I'm trying to ask.
Not the way I read it.
So there's no change in the investigations that you're currently doing that will go to human capital?
Not in this policy.
That didn't answer my question. Are there changes in what you're currently doing based on what this is saying, are there changes in what you're currently doing? Will the investigations change and go from you to human capital management?
No, ma'am, not that I'm aware of.
None of them.
Not that I'm aware. Trustee Jones?
Thank you. I may be a broken record on this, but, you know, an audit committee is a standing committee of a body. It exists for some fairly important reasons, and it follows standards that the Institute for Internal Auditors and several other major governing organizations set for entities. We may not follow certain external requirements that companies must in terms of compliance, but the standards don't change. I mean, the standards from IIA and several other organizations set specific requirements. And here's the confusion that continues to be a problem for me. Public sector has its own set of standards about what constitutes a best practice and what an audit committee's role and function should be. Most audit committees are there to deal with the financial related issues that go to internal and external reporting and controls and related risk management. What's changing in today's world is risk management is now becoming a huge area that goes beyond just financial. And audit committees exist to be part of, I guess you could say, the way in which you check and balance those controls, set those controls, and set some of those standards. The piece that we keep muddling here is the separate piece about what a role of, and I'll call it for lack of a better term, an ombudsman does in an organization, a public agency organization. And that goes to the issue of making sure, as far as investigations go, that it's an independent body that is able to do oversight and make sure that all those controls and all those elements are fully doing what they're supposed to do, and also is able to do independent investigations of management to be able to validate or verify or whatever, clarify whatever needs to be done. And those are different things. And we somehow, when we took OPR and put parts of it under the internal audit function, didn't quite resolve it, and somehow we're not really dealing with the relationship between those areas and the board and the audit committee and its responsibility, and also the way an audit committee reports to a board, and also the independence of an audit committee as it relates to dealing with the external audit function and that relationship. And this is where I think we haven't done enough on this particular clarification. And also, we haven't done enough to resolve, and I think that goes to the heart of Trustee Foreman's issues, the independence and the investigation function and where it fits and how it's defined and otherwise structured within the internal audit area. We also haven't defined the role and responsibility of internal audit sufficiently as it relates to the board and as it relates to the audit committee with respect to all these different areas we just discussed. And this is where it continues to bother me. I know that having sat in on the audit committee and also having the benefit of two experts who served that committee, that some of this was expressed. I know that our previous auditors, Deloitte, has a whole governance practice and a whole bunch of resources that we could use and didn't use in terms of helping shape this. I know a lot of recommendations have been made, but I still don't see it reflected in both the charter, the document here, which goes to policy, and then also how the departmental plan and the oversight and the relationship to the various functions are being done. And that goes to the heart of the PSO 2, which is still kind of out there, and that goes to the heart of CAA and DH and everything else. So, personal suggestion, try to map the whole thing, then try to see the parts and how they fit, try and see where the gaps are in terms of policy versus practice, and also look at best practice structures. I think we started that, but it hasn't quite been brought into this process, and get it laid out in its entirety. I appreciate that you're trying to resolve some of the policy, but to me, these things are all interdependent and also should all be clarified at once, so y'all know all the different parts and how they fit, and that you've made sure not to confuse pieces, which I think the original audit charter is very confusing, because it sort of looked at a world that was very different when it was created, and it was a very narrow world, and we've expanded that world. The internal audit function has changed dramatically, and so the committee versus the department are not aligned, and then the department versus the organization are not aligned. So those are my suggestions. And actually, the whole area of risk management has grown exponentially as far as the internal audit function. That too needs to be brought into the way in which we're doing thinking. And that's not just true in the public sector, it's true pretty much across all different groups. I mean, areas like cybersecurity, for example, we have nothing on. I mean, areas that are huge areas of risk management in organizations is nowhere embedded. And fraud, waste, and abuse is a big one, but there's lots of stuff beyond that in risk management that we're not addressing. So, and I'm happy to continue to help in that area. It is of great importance that we get that right, and that does go to good governance.
Thank you. Trustee Bean?
Yeah, I just, as a member of the audit committee, Dan, I think it would be good for this to go back to the audit committee, because I know Lou talked about some of this just very generally, and we really haven't had an opportunity to look at it in depth. So I would look forward to examining it more closely in the audit committee meeting.
Yeah, it's first read discussion only, so I think that's a good recommendation. Anybody else before we move on? Thank you.
I have a point of information.
Sure.
Why was DH and CAA pulled?
The administration looked at the draft, and we hadn't come to some agreement on some pretty key points. So we're taking a look at that again.
And does that include, because I thought that...
Point of order. We're not supposed to put it together. Sorry.
Well,
Yeah, talk about it afterwards.
thank you.
All right, moving on to BE Local, President Solis and administration bringing us forward.
Yes. So BE Local on my end, separate and apart from the administration, apparently the administration had already been working on particular changes to BE Local. Per our conversations and actions that were taken as it related to the particular policy, and based on at least one or two legal opinions that we received as a board at large from board attorneys, I thought it was wise to bring forth amendments to this particular policy to make sure that we can ensure that we have clear language as it relates to two particular portions of the policy that are consistently conflated. And it's not, and I don't use that word with a negative connotation, it's just that we don't have particular language addressing issues that I think that we take action on a not a consistent basis, but it comes up. I know that we've had conversations about special meetings in the past. I know that there at least was one special meeting that I called earlier in the year, and I know Trustee Cowan at one point, and actually probably multiple points during your presidency, you called special meetings. It's always been assumed when we have the conversation about a special meeting, that a special meeting, if it is requested by 3 trustees, or a written request, that meeting will happen within 60 days. But when you actually read the policy itself, it doesn't address it. In fact, if you look at the special meetings portion, it says that the president of the board shall call a special meeting at the president's discretion or at the written request of 3 board members, period. It doesn't state a time. It doesn't state when that must happen. And in fact, you could read it a couple of different ways. And so I guess the point that I'm making is the less that we can leave to interpretation as it relates to a particular process, I think the better. And if you go down a little further to BE, how you get items on a board briefing agenda, there is a particular process there as well. And what that says is, an individual board member may request in writing that the board president place an item on the board briefing meeting agenda 10 days in advance of a board briefing meeting. And then it goes on. If that doesn't happen, three things can happen. First, 3 board members may request that items be placed on the board agenda for discussion, period. It doesn't say when that has to happen. There is a time frame, but that's portion number 3. Number 2, it says if applicable, the board president consults the superintendent and they determine whether or not to move that item forward to the board meeting or then to kick it back to the next board briefing. And then the last piece, it says, in any event, though, the item shall be placed on the agenda for deliberation no later than 60 days after presentment. So that's where we get this idea of 60 days, something having to happen within 60 days. And what you'll notice, I think, in this portion is that the reason that we have a policy around board briefings, and it differentiated from special meetings, is because those are 2 very different types of discussion and different processes. We use a board briefing to be able to vet, as we've done all day today, particular items. Most of the time, from a board's perspective, policy that we know we're going to have to take another look at. But if you read this policy the way that it's written, if I'm a trustee and I want to get something on the board briefing agenda and I don't get it on the first time and I don't get it on the second time, then essentially we have to have a special meeting around an item that should have gone through a board briefing process, which I guess would make that a special meeting. But then it leaves open to interpretation for future boards the idea of potentially just having us, or any board, say I want to have a conversation on a board briefing item and saying, let's do 10 or 12 board briefing items and it never makes it to an agenda, so then we have to have a special meeting within the 60th day to take action on that particular item, and so we circumvent the board briefing process. So I guess the point is that there are multiple interpretations that future boards, I think, can take when it comes to how you get an item on a board briefing versus how you get an item on a special meeting agenda and when those things actually have to happen. So what I've suggested is to just be much more specific on what that looks like and lay out a clear process so that there's no interpretation, that there's no back and forth as to what was actually asked for, what wasn't asked for. And I think that would be, I think that's wise on our end. So here's the language that I'm proposing. Where it says special or emergency meetings, it says the president of the board shall call a special meeting at the president's discretion or at the formal request of 3 board members. A formal request shall do a few things. Be submitted by 1 board member, either by email or paper correspondence. Contain agreed upon uniform open and or closed session language to be added to the special meeting agenda. This would be agreed upon by those 3 trustees. Be submitted as 1 document to the Office of Board Services and formally date stamped. And what I mean by that is, again, if you submit it by email, is that the email contains those 3 trustees. The formal date stamp already happens because it's in an email. But if you didn't want to do it that way, Trustee Bingham, I know in the past, has gotten signatures from other trustees with the formal language, and that was date stamped and turned into the Board Services office. So you can do it that way as well. And then contain the digital or written signatures of the 3 board members requesting a special meeting. So what that, clearly if it's written, you just have 3 signatures. If you submit it, it would be the other 2 trustees identifying that they agree to this language. Then the president of the board shall be immediately notified of the special meeting request by the Office of Board Services, and the special meeting shall be held no later than 60 days after the formal written request is received. It's a very clear process. It says this is what a special meeting is, this is how it's initiated, and it has to happen by this particular date. And then if you go down to the board briefing component, it says the deadline for board members submitting any proposed agenda items to the Office of Board Services for inclusion on an upcoming board briefing agenda is 12 p.m. of the 10th calendar day before the board briefing. All proposed agenda items will undergo a legal review as they do. The proposal shall be submitted again either by email or paper correspondence. If applicable, contain uniform open and or closed session language to be added to the board briefing agenda so it's very clear what you want. Be formally date stamped. But the president of the board shall be immediately notified of the item requested by the Office of Board Services. If for whatever reason and I didn't add this portion, this is what the administration had, so I'd like to kind of hear your rationale on this. the consultant with the superintendent component. But then after that, if the individual board member's requested item is not placed on the immediate board briefing agenda as requested, then the item shall be placed on the following board briefing agenda, and the board member shall be notified. And I've also offered safeguard there to make sure that the board president and the superintendent don't try to circumvent that request from the trustees. So if you go down to the removal of items from the agenda, it says in there that the superintendent, neither the superintendent of schools nor the board president shall have the authority to remove from the agenda